The world is on edge as the conflict in Ukraine intensifies to critical levels. Recently, a bold statement from Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken ignited fierce backlash from Russia. In an interview, he expressed that if Russia were to target Brussels with missiles, NATO's response would be nothing short of annihilating Moscow. The phrase, "we'd flatten Moscow," reverberated through the media, igniting controversy and instigating a clarifying response from Franken himself. As tensions escalate, Franken's words raised eyebrows and concerns across Europe. He firmly stated that any attack on Brussels would be seen as a severe threat to NATO itself, emphasizing the necessity for strong military retaliation. This provoked reactions suggesting that his comments could lead to dangerous misinterpretations, potentially escalating the already volatile situation. During a discussion about President Trump's commitment to NATO, Franken expressed disbelief at the assumption that the U.S. would hesitate in its support. "Who doubts America would act decisively?" he challenged, asserting that NATO would respond vigorously to any aggression. However, he acknowledged the need for strategic thinking, recalling how previous fears of escalation allowed the conflict to drag on. "We must let go of that fear," Franken insisted, noting that the more assertive military actions taken against Russia had proven necessary, despite the Kremlin's threats. His remarks seemed to suggest that Putin was bluffing, knowing the dire consequences of using nuclear weapons would likely lead to Russia's destruction. But what does this mean for the future? As the battlefield dynamics shift, Russia's recent missile strikes have targeted critical infrastructure in Ukraine, highlighting a striking escalation strategy in response to Ukrainian offenses. With Russia ramping up its military capabilities, they continue to benefit from a war economy that outpaces NATO's ammunition production. In a world where each action triggers a counteraction, the stakes have never been higher. Franken's views are unyielding, as he firmly believes that a united NATO remains the best defense against Russian ambitions. The escalating series of threats and counter-threats could prove catastrophic. Will dialogue prevail, or are we headed toward a larger conflict that could reshape global alliances forever? As these leaders' perspectives clash, the clock ticks ominously towards an uncertain future. As the conflict in Ukraine escalates, tensions on the battlefield reach a critical point. European leaders are sharpening their rhetoric, igniting fierce responses from Moscow, particularly from President Vladimir Putin. In a striking interview with a Flemish newspaper, Belgian Defense and Foreign Trade Minister Theo Franken indicated that any missile attack from Russia on Brussels would provoke a powerful counterattack. "We would wipe Moscow off the map." This audacious declaration sent shockwaves through Europe, compelling Franken to clarify his remarks on social media. Franken's comments came in response to concerns about a potential non-nuclear missile strike on Brussels by Russia. He firmly stated, "If it strikes NATO's heart, we wouldn't hesitate." His provocative statement raises significant questions about NATO's commitment to collective defense. When pressed about past comments from former President Trump about the U.S. honoring its obligations under NATO, Franken's irritation was palpable. "Why wouldn't he honor Article 5, he responded sharply. Trump's past remarks have left some uncertainty about NATO's future unity, especially when he hinted at defining the treaty's obligations based on interpretation. Yet Franken was resolute, asserting that the U.S. would stand firmly by its allies. The conversation took an even more intense turn when the interviewer referenced discussions about arming Ukraine with advanced weaponry. Franken dismissed the Kremlin's alarm, recalling how similar threats had emerged when Finland and Sweden joined NATO. Ukraine's resilience against Russian advances has been bolstered by Western aid, but is the tide truly turning? Franken argues against underestimating Russian capabilities, insisting that they are far from a weak force. Echoing a harsh reality, he pointed out, the Russians have bolstered their war machine, they produce 4 times the ammunition that NATO can muster. The threat remains palpable, leading to dire consequences for both sides. How far is the West willing to go to ensure NATO's survival? The Oreshnik missile system introduced by Russia has raised eyebrows in the international community. State claims suggest it can travel at Mach 10, making it almost impossible for NATO's defenses to intercept. Are these claims exaggerated, or does Russia possess a genuine threat capable of changing the war's dynamics? With each move, the stakes grow higher. As Europe grapples with the implications of this arms race, will the power balance shift, or will a catastrophic collision bring about a different kind of reckoning? In a heated exchange between top European leaders, tensions are escalating as they openly discuss the alarming possibilities of missile strikes against European cities, specifically Brussels. Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken boldly proclaimed that a Russian attack would trigger an overwhelming response, citing a potential obliteration of Moscow. But how far will these words push the Kremlin? The stirring words by Franken sent waves across media outlets, prompting the Kremlin's vehement rebuke and leaving many to ponder the repercussions. During his interview with reporter Raf Likens, Franken described the potential NATO response to a missile strike, suggesting they would wipe it from the face of the earth. His answer to whether he feared a Russian missile targeting Brussels was unambiguous: no. He stated that would hit the heart of NATO, and we would respond accordingly. This bold stance ignited controversy, especially as Likens raised concerns about previous comments made by former President Donald Trump regarding NATO commitments. Franken defended Trump, rolling his eyes at the skepticism about American support. Why wouldn't the U.S. honor its commitments, he retorted, dismissing fears about NATO's unity in the event of an attack. Yet, the core of their interview highlighted the fragile balance of power. While NATO prides itself on its military capabilities, Franken voiced concerns about the stark realities of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. He pointed out that Russia's military economy is capable of producing 4 times the ammunition compared to NATO countries. The staggering numbers intensified discussions about military spending and preparedness. Just when was the last moment when Russian military strength appeared dubious, the world is now faced with a new layer of concern: the hypersonic Oreshnik missile. Rumored to reach Mach 10 speeds, equivalent to over 7,600 miles per hour, these missiles supposedly have the potential of causing destruction without traditional blasts. With no footage of direct impacts, speculation grows about the true nature of these weapons. Could they inflict as much devastation as nuclear arms, but without fallout? While Putin boasted about their capabilities, skepticism from Western analysts lingered in the air. On the eve of heightened tensions following Franken's words, reports surfaced about Belarus preparing to deploy these Oreshnik missiles, a clear indication that the stakes are rising. But does NATO truly possess the might to deter these advances? What will happen if these hypersonic threats are indeed as lethal as claimed? Franken faced further scrutiny regarding NATO's military expenditures. With a target of increasing defense spending to 5% of GDP, he argued the necessity of such enhancements. But does this mean he believes NATO's current capabilities are insufficient? He acknowledged that comparisons to Russian forces must factor in their effective use of resources, challenging the notion that NATO holds an edge. Amidst these discussions, the understanding of warfare has shifted dramatically. Ukrainians, armed with NATO supplies and financial support, are now viewed through a lens of valor and desperation. Defending against a powerful adversary. Franken underscored that without Western support, the outcome of their struggle could have been vastly different, yet still continues to draw questions on NATO's long-term strategy. As global attention focuses on this chess game of power, the world remains poised to witness the unfolding saga, where declarations may spark a dangerous escalation and military posturing becomes more volatile, leading us to ask, are we on the brink of something unimaginable? As the war in Ukraine reaches a pivotal turning point, European leaders escalate their rhetoric, igniting a firestorm with their words. Recently, Belgian Minister Theo Franken boldly asserted that should Russia launch missiles at Brussels, NATO's response would be nothing short of catastrophic, declaring, "We'd flatten Moscow." This declaration sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles, triggering a furious reaction from the Kremlin and raising questions about the potential consequences of such bold statements. Franken's comments came during an interview where he addressed a terrifying possibility: a missile strike on Brussels. His resolute stance, that any such attack would compel NATO to retaliate with overwhelming force, echoed throughout Europe, forcing him to clarify his remarks later on social media. In his unsettling assertion, he implied that not only would the attack provoke a response, but that it would fundamentally alter the geopolitical landscape. As Franken dissected NATO's response protocol, he rebuffed concerns that the U.S. might falter under pressure, especially referencing President Trump's ambiguous stance on NATO commitments. The interviewer, Ralph Leekens, pressed him about Trump's prior remarks, suggesting a lack of commitment from the U.S., but Franken was resolute. The American support is unwavering. If missiles strike Brussels, expect a powerful reaction, he insisted. Franken's confidence stemmed from a belief in NATO's superior firepower and unity, but he did not shy away from acknowledging the complexity of the situation. He pointed out that Russia has been ramping up its military capabilities at an alarming pace. In fact, he noted that the Russian war economy churns out 4 times as much ammunition as NATO combined. This raised an unsettling question: could the perceived superiority of NATO really withstand an all-out Russian offensive? Using purchasing power parity measurements, Russia, despite being the 11th largest nominal economy, actually ranks as the 4th largest when adjusted for real economic capabilities. This stark comparison sent chills through those watching the unfolding conflict, illustrating the true might of Russia's military-industrial complex. Franken painted a grim picture. The Russian military may appear bogged down in Ukraine, but they are not fighting alone. They face the entire West, and without our support, Ukraine would have crumbled long ago, he warned. In this high-stakes game of chess, the implications of such candor were profound. The stakes were not just military, they were existential. Europe lacked a cohesive command structure, with only minimal forces capable of rapid deployment. As he contemplated the future, his warnings resonated. Underestimating Russia could spell disaster, especially for nations comfortable in their historical dominance. Franken's final takeaway was chilling. The conflict in Ukraine is not merely a territorial squabble but a full-blown confrontation with a power that remains resolute, infused with a fighting spirit born from its military successes in Chechnya and Syria. The question lingered: is the West prepared to confront such a formidable adversary? Or are we watching history repeat itself, as nations make costly miscalculations? As Europe braces for what comes next, the echoes of Franken's comments serve as a stark reminder of the fragile state of peace in an increasingly volatile world. Would NATO stand united if the worst were to happen? And, more importantly, could Europe's future hinge on the decisions made today? The answers remain uncertain, but one thing is clear: the world is watching. In a tense atmosphere, as the conflict in Ukraine reaches a critical juncture, European leaders are amplifying their rhetoric. One statement has particularly ignited fury in Moscow. Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken declared that if Russia were to target Brussels with missiles, the response would be catastrophic. "We would wipe Moscow off the map," he boldly asserted, a comment that did not go unnoticed. This provocative statement echoed across Europe, prompting Franken to clarify his words on social media. But what impact does this rhetoric have on the broader conflict? Franken's controversial comments were a response to a question about the potential for a Russian missile to strike a NATO stronghold. The implications were clear: an attack on Brussels would be viewed as an attack on all member states. The interviewer pressed him about the U.S.'s commitment to NATO, referencing Donald Trump's ambiguous stance on military support for Europe. With annoyance, Franken dismissed the doubts around U.S. reliability, stating outright that America would defend its allies. A missile targeting Brussels? It's a clear call for action, he insisted. His conviction begs a larger question: could such military aggression lead to escalation? During discussions, Franken noted the lessons learned from previous conflicts, asserting that Europe must not cower in fear of possible Russian responses. Each warning from Putin about nuclear options was met with skepticism. For the West, the potential catastrophe of such weapons serves as a deterrent rather than a reason for hesitation. Putin knows the stakes. If he escalates, it's curtains for Moscow, he stated, his eyes reflecting the gravity of his assertion. However, Russia's military capability should not be taken lightly. While public narratives suggest incompetence on the Russian side, Franken argues that the reality is vastly different. Ukraine is not battling Russia alone, it has the whole of NATO's support behind it, he described, emphasizing that the weapons, ammunition, and finances supplied to Ukraine are what keep them from being overrun. But even with substantial financial backing exceeding $280 billion from Western allies, Franken remains unconvinced of Ukraine's ability to dominate solo. Without a significant troop presence from Europe, we're unlikely to bend Russia to its knees, he warned, not mincing words. His suggestion to escalate military presence would likely be met with reluctance in Parliament, where enthusiasm for conflict is waning. Instead, he believes that the true battle lies in economic warfare. Historically, we must break Russia economically, he urged. Expanding sanctions and diminishing oil and gas revenues are crucial to crippling their war economy. As Ukrainian forces target Russian oil refineries with precision strikes, Franken remains skeptical about the effectiveness of these strategies in achieving long-term goals. Reports from Moscow indicate that basic life continues unaffected. The regime endures, with citizens still supporting their military from the comfort of cafes, he noted, highlighting the brainwashing that bolsters public support for the war effort. While NATO members may not fear immediate invasion, particularly with the advanced capabilities of the F-35 fighter jets, the stakes remain alarmingly high. With 600 F-35s soon in Europe, the Russians aren't taking any chances, declared Franken. The looming question is whether swift action can prevent the sounds of war from echoing through the continent, or if time will show that the real battleground continues to be one of resources, resolve, and rhetoric. The clock ticks on, and with it, the future of Europe hangs in the balance. As the conflict in Ukraine reaches a critical juncture, European leaders ramp up their rhetoric, provoking a fierce reaction from Moscow. This week, Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade Theo Franken made bold statements suggesting a devastating NATO response to any Russian missile strike on Brussels. His declaration? If Moscow launches an attack, Brussels would respond with overwhelming force, potentially wiping Moscow off the map. Franken's comments ignited a firestorm of controversy, prompting him to clarify his remarks publicly. During an interview, when pressed about his thoughts on a possible Russian missile hitting Brussels, he reiterated that such an act would trigger NATO's collective defense response, leaving no doubt about the consequences for Russia. In this charged atmosphere, a question looms large: how far is the Kremlin willing to escalate tensions? Following Franken's comments, Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a stern warning, hinting at the dire repercussions should NATO take aggressive measures. Yet, what many fail to grasp is the intricate and perilous balance of power at play. The tension didn't break here. In response to Ukraine's ongoing counteroffensives and the military aid flowing in from Western allies, Russia intensified its missile strikes, targeting not just military assets, but also critical infrastructure. This escalation speaks volumes about the Kremlin's growing desperation. Yet, here's where the unexpected twist lies. While Russian missile capabilities are formidable, the nerves of NATO and its allies are equally steeled. Western analysts question whether the boasts of hypersonic missiles and advanced weaponry can genuinely alter the battlefield dynamics, or if they serve merely as psychological tools in Putin's arsenal. The stakes have never been higher. What will happen if fears become reality? Could one initial strike spiral into an all-out confrontation? As NATO stands firm, the question lingers: how prepared are we for a conflict of this magnitude? In an increasingly unpredictable landscape, the signs warn us, the world might be closer to the brink than we'd ever anticipated. Will Franken's predictions hold weight in the face of Moscow's fierce retaliatory capability? From the cozy confines of European cities to the stark battlegrounds in Ukraine, the air is thick with uncertainty. Tensions simmer, and every word exchanged in the media reverberates through the halls of power. As we delve deeper into this geopolitical drama, what twists and turns lie ahead in this high-stakes confrontation? How will the unfolding events shape the future not just for Europe, but for global security? As we dissect these developments, we'll uncover the terrifying possibilities that could unfold if tensions escalate further. Are we prepared for the unthinkable? The outcome of this conflict is not just a matter of politics but could result in profound ramifications that leave no one untouched. As the war in Ukraine escalates into a pivotal clash, tensions are brewing behind the guarded walls of the Kremlin. Recent statements from Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, ignited a storm, compelling the Kremlin to react fiercely. Franken's declaration that any missile strike on Brussels would result in the flattening of Moscow sent shockwaves through Europe and drew a pointed response from Russian officials. The battle of words turned into a theatrical exchange during an interview with a Flemish newspaper. When asked about Russia's potential missile threats, Franken responded confidently, suggesting that NATO's retaliation would be swift and merciless. The statement implied a readiness to respond with overwhelming force, a sentiment that raised eyebrows and sparked outrage in Moscow. But what lies behind this bravado? Franken's assertions reveal a broader narrative of European warfare readiness. He emphasized that the very essence of NATO's collective defense hinges on a robust and united front against any aggressor. Even as questions arose about the reliability of American support under past leadership, Franken's faith in NATO remained unshakable. It painted a vivid picture of a unified Europe, standing resolutely against the Russian threat. Yet, as the interview progressed, the contrast between perception and reality became glaringly apparent. Russia's military capacity, often dismissed in Western narratives, was cast in a different light. With an economy that can produce far more ammunition than NATO, the gap in military readiness isn't as vast as one might assume. A detailed examination of Russia's military strategies reveals an army still capable of formidable resistance. Imagine the sound of sirens, the heavy thud of boots on concrete, and the acrid smell of burnt fuel in the air. As conflicts rage and artillery fire lights up the night sky, the true nature of warfare unfolds, a harsh reality where both sides grapple with the looming specter of obliteration. The stakes are undeniably high, and it becomes increasingly clear that mistaking bravado for capability could have dire consequences. The unsettling truth? Russian military executions of its own troops are not mere rumors, they are well-documented incidents that highlight the depths of chaos within the ranks. As these soldiers face the brutality of their own commanders, the question remains, how long can a military built on fear and violence withstand the hunger for survival? The tales of internal dissent within the Russian armed forces are shocking. Reports indicate that disillusioned soldiers are retaliating against incompetent leaders, mutiny sparked by senseless missions painted against a backdrop of desperation. As the reality of execution and retaliation breeds a climate of fear, the possibility of internal collapse looms larger than ever. This unfolding drama reveals how the Russian military, once seen as a monolithic force, is fraying at the edges. While the headlines focus on bold declarations and battlefield statistics, a darker story of betrayal and breakdown emerges, one that could alter the very fabric of this ongoing conflict. In light of this intricate dance of power, the impending question arises, what will this turbulent atmosphere mean for the future of not only the war in Ukraine but for Europe as a whole? Only time will tell, but the echoes of this brutal confrontation remind us that peace is often shattered by the smallest of sparks. In a gripping episode of ongoing conflict, shocking revelations have come to light about the brutal reality facing Russian soldiers on the battlefield. An investigation by the independent Russian outlet Verstka shed light on a grim practice known as obnalini, or zeroing out. This term describes the chilling method used by some military commanders who carry out summary executions of their own troops. A total of 101 soldiers have been identified in these heinous acts, with confirmations from at least 2 independent sources. The implications are staggering. How could it come to this? Amid Russia's full-scale invasion, the main military prosecutor's office has received over 12,000 complaints regarding internal killings, which raises profound questions about the command structure and accountability within the military. Interestingly, these are not merely statistics, they represent the lives of actual soldiers who were killed by their own comrades. With an estimated 700,000 troops deployed in Ukraine, this equates to roughly 1.7% of the total forces. A chilling thought, how would you feel knowing that every day, more than 8 of your fellow soldiers are executed for refusing to follow what are arguably suicidal orders? The horrifying process of zeroing out unfolds in various fatal ways. The most straightforward method is a direct execution, reserved for soldiers who hesitate to engage in so-called human wave tactics. These tactics often require them to charge into battle with minimal support, facing overwhelming odds. As they march forward, the fear of betrayal looms large. The smell of gunpowder fills the air, mingling with the chilling silence that follows an execution. Amidst this heart-wrenching backdrop, morale plummets. Imagine the sounds of distant gunfire and the knowledge that any refusal to comply could lead to a grim fate. The informal ban on investigating officers suggests a twisted sense of urgency to maintain combat effectiveness, regardless of the human cost. This dismal reality leaves soldiers feeling more like pawns in a deadly game rather than warriors fighting for a cause. Could this atrocity be merely a reflection of a broken military system? As we delve deeper into this dark tale, we will uncover how such practices not only threaten the lives of soldiers but also undermine the very integrity of military force itself. What happens next in this world of chaos and desperation? Stay tuned as we explore the intricate web of power, control, and the haunting echoes of accountability, or the lack thereof. In the shadowed depths of a relentless conflict, Russian commanders are shattering the spirits of their own soldiers through brutal zeroing-out tactics. This exposes the profound cracks in their army's resolve. The first method? Swift, direct executions. It targets troops who balk at the suicidal waves, those desperate human assaults hurled without backup. Imagine the acrid stench of gunpowder hanging thick in the air, as soldiers are gunned down point-blank in muddy trenches. The report from Medusa reveals the grim fate of mobilized fighter Alexei. In the 7th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade, refusals to charge into senseless assaults mean instant death by automatic rifle fire. Bodies, limp and bloodied, are dumped into rushing rivers, or hastily buried near the dank earth of the front lines. The soil clings to boots, a tactile reminder of sacrifice turned slaughter. June 2025 brought another horror. A soldier with the call sign Fixer dared to defy orders. He refused to act as bait, no armor, no weapons, just exposed flesh to lure out enemy fire. Beaten savagely on camera, tortured with sizzling electric shocks that made his skin crawl with agony, then shot cold-bloodedly by his superior. How can a man endure such betrayal from those meant to lead? Every crack of gunfire echoes like thunder through the fog. But the executions don't stop there. Officers deploy snipers during missions, picking off deserters mid-flight from the chaos. In Alexei's unit, those marksmen claimed 20 lives in 2023. And a staggering 40 in 2024. Imagine the sharp twang of a rifle, the dull thud of a fall. Have these killers continued the carnage, racking up dozens more? Or, in a twisted twist of irony, were the snipers themselves silenced for refusing to pull the trigger again? The uncertainty looms, a haunting whisper in the wind. And now, drones add a chilling layer to this cycle. Russian forces, matching Ukraine's skill with unmanned eyes in the sky, force operators into roles of doom. In the 139th Separate Assault Battalion, commanders hold guns to pilots' heads. They demand relentless surveillance, commanding the launch of explosive EFFPV kamikaze drones onto fleeing soldiers. The buzzing hum of the drone overhead, the sudden, fiery explosion ripping through the earth. It's a macabre game where hesitation seals a fate. Yet, if troops escape instant death, a darker abyss beckons. What unspeakable tribulations lurk in those waiting periods? The fear grips tighter than a vice, hinting at torments that could shatter even the bravest soul. Will the next revelation expose an even deadlier manipulation of men's loyalty? Stay tuned for the shock that redefines war's cruelty. What happens when the hunted become the hunters in their own ranks? The battlefield whispers, no one is truly safe. Imagine the horror of soldiers held at gunpoint by drone operators, forced to keep advancing in combat. If they try to flee, explosives from kamikaze drones rain down instantly. Failure to execute means facing something even darker and more terrifying. What if dying quickly was the mercy? In some cases, soldiers endure grueling torture instead. Trapped in damp pits or filthy cellars, no food, no water, nothing. The stench of sweat and fear fills the air, rough hands of guards beating repeatedly, each strike echoing like thunder in the cramped space. Bruises swell, bones crack under the pain. Many fade away slowly from starvation or injuries too severe to bear. Others, desperate for freedom, battle each other barehanded in those pits, the cold dirt under their feet, the metallic taste of blood in their mouths, just to earn a chance at escape. A chilling video from May 2025 captures this nightmare. Two fighters from the 114th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade clash in a deep hole. Off-screen, a voice taunts, Commander Kammer says the one who takes down the other gets out. They grapple fiercely, grunting with effort. One locks in a chokehold, seconds stretch into agony as the other twists and struggles, then goes limp. What fate awaits the survivor? Some whisper they're prisoners of war, broken under endless cruelty. Investigations point to Kammer, a real call sign for the brigade's leader, accused of shaking down his own men for money, lining his pockets while they suffer. Is this the lowest form of human depravity? Leaders might shy from direct killings, but suicide missions become their weapon. Soldiers sent into chaos without vests, guns, or gear. The howl of the wind carries distant explosions as they charge forward. Barrier troops lurk behind, their task to shove deserters back, or worse. In one recent report, these blockers now wield drones, pelting runners with blasts from above. Bodies scatter, skin singed by heat that feels like fire itself. This twist perverts history's dark tactics, echoing Stalin's chains of barrier forces, meant to herd penal units into slaughter zones. But here's the twist: did future evolutions of war really cross into blatant atrocities? Imagine the ethical storm brewing. What if the shadows of history hid even darker secrets today, soldiers vanishing without a trace, families left in endless grief? Imagine the chill of unspoken fears gripping a nation at war. 347 characters. In our last look, we uncovered how modern barrier units twist Stalin's harsh legacy, forcing survivors from punishment squads into suicidal charges that defy all laws of humanity and scream potential war crimes. These twisted enforcers push men into the deadliest assaults, where survival hangs by a thread thinner than fog at dawn. Even in Stalin's era, leaders saw outright punishment as a foolish loss. Why waste a fighter in the mud when he could charge again? Can you feel the damp earth underfoot, the metallic tang of fear in the air? Yet today, when officers enforce brutal discipline, the fallen rarely return with their real story. Their remains? Often hidden in shadowy woods or left amid the scarred fields, with echoes of gunfire mimicking the chaos of battle. Officially, they're just gone, missing, or branded as cowards who fled. No honors. No aid for those left behind, hearts breaking in silent homes. Take Vladislav Bulyakov, from the 6th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade. He shared a haunting memory of his friend, known only by the call sign Odessa, facing unthinkable cruelty from superiors. The aftermath? They staged it all, old gear on the body, hidden dangers triggered to explode. To mask any traces that a doctor's eye might spot, they let the summer sun bake the evidence, days turning flesh to whispers of decay. Finally, shipped home as a battlefield hero. But was it honor? Or a veil of lies? Families, fueled by gut-wrenching doubt, dare to question. They knock on doors, voices trembling with pleas. But the system? It's a fortress built to shield the guilty. A source from the military prosecutor's office, who leaked complaint files to independent voices, revealed a quiet rule from the top: no probes into frontline officers during the so-called special operation. Immunity until peace, or whatever end, comes. It's a shield of silence, cold as winter steel. Even Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB, tries to dig deeper. Their agents push forward, but walls rise fast. Military brass and officials block every step, turning truth into ghosts. One investigator whispered of witnesses vanishing too, bodies found in ways labeled as self-inflicted despair, yet riddled with signs pointing to foul play. Evisceration? Sliced wounds? The official story crumbles under scrutiny, leaving a trail of suspicion thicker than battlefield smoke. Why does this web of cover-ups persist, trapping the innocent in endless night? As escalations mount on distant fronts, what hidden fractures could shatter the facade next? The fight rages on, but these buried pains whisper of a deeper storm brewing. Summary of the previous part. Reports reveal chilling evidence of Russian commanders exploiting their soldiers' trust. Facing significant challenges, soldiers are coerced into handing over bank details, leaving their families in despair. As tensions rise, many Russian soldiers are expressing their discontent and pushing back against their superiors. This sets the stage for a dramatic turning point in the conflict. Imagine a battlefield where loyalty turns into rebellion. On June 2025, brave men from a Russian motor rifle unit stood at a crossroads. Within the war-torn Donetsk region, chaos reigned, yet the toughest battle was not with the enemy, it was against their own commanders. Faced with impossible orders, a challenge echoed in their hearts. Would they follow orders that seemed suicidal, or fight for their own survival? The atmosphere crackled, tension so thick it felt suffocating. When their leader issued a threat of execution for those who wouldn't charge, a loud gunshot rang out. The commander, who believed fear would keep his men in line, found himself fatally mistaken. His soldiers, tired of his tyranny, turned their weapons against him. Just moments later, they surrendered to Ukrainian forces in droves, shedding their oppressive chains. The act of defiance revealed a catastrophic shift in military loyalty. Would they survive longer as prisoners than at the hands of their own? In the wake of this unprecedented mutiny, the atmosphere began to shift. These soldiers shared harrowing accounts of command abuse, desperate conditions, and the crumbling structure within their own ranks. It painted a grim picture, one where self-preservation overshadowed allegiance to Russia. Ukrainian intelligence confirmed what was becoming evident: such acts were no longer isolated incidents but a growing phenomenon. And so, a vital question emerges: in a conflict defined by relentless bloodshed, what happens when loyalty to one's country is eclipsed by the desire for survival? The war's momentum began to shift. These soldiers showed that the war was not solely about territory, it was also a battle for the very essence of human dignity. Could the strength of unity on the battlefield redefine the future? Would the tide of rebellion change the course of history? The answers lie in the actions of the soldiers who chose not to fight for blind loyalty but to reclaim their lives in the face of tyranny. In today's world, where the clang of weapons and the scent of smoke intertwine with the cries of those caught in conflict, one narrative stands at a pivotal crossroad: the escalating war in Ukraine. This week, amid heavy fighting, European leaders are raising their voices, with words that resonate like thunder across the continent. One standout moment? Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken's explosive comments during an interview that could send ripples through geopolitics. What did he say to provoke such a reaction? Franken's bold assertion reverberated throughout media outlets, especially his remarks suggesting that any missile assault on Brussels would result in a ferocious response: we'd flatten Moscow. The Kremlin's fury was immediate, with President Vladimir Putin's statements hinting at ominous consequences that could unleash turmoil. But what did Franken really mean? As he attempted to clarify the potential fallout, one question lingered: could this turn the tide of war? In a tense exchange with interviewer Raf Likens, the stakes rose higher. When asked about the U.S. standing firm under NATO's protective Article 5, Franken scoffed at the doubt that President Trump or any leader would falter. He argued forcefully that the threat of Russia would unite NATO in retaliation. But how solid is this belief amid so much uncertainty about commitment and response? Flashing back, the echoes of past battles filled the air as reminders of the current crisis surged. You must strike back, he urged, recalling the initial hesitance that brought prolonged suffering. Each missile strike in Ukraine's ongoing struggle becomes a dark reminder of the war's toll. And the troubling statistics do not lie: Russia faces an extinction of its military spirit as desertions rise. Tales of Russian soldiers contemplating surrender resonate deeply, with intercepted communications revealing their desperate desire to escape, fearing their own commanders more than their adversaries. Franken's observations about Russia's staggering losses illuminate a grim reality: upwards of 1,140,000 soldiers have met their fate on the battlefield, while a staggering 140,000 have returned home. But what awaits them there? The harsh truth is that the allure of combat pay traps many in a vicious cycle. With military salaries vastly outpacing civilian wages, those returning from war are drawn back into the fray. It's a situation marked by desperation for financial security, creating a permanent military caste reliant on continued warfare. As we navigate this turbulent landscape, the question remains, will the smoke clear, revealing a path to peace, or will the echoes of conflict grow louder as desperation mounts? The stakes couldn't be higher, and only time will tell how this tragic coin toss will unfold. Each statement and strategy has consequences that ripple far beyond borders, and the world watches with bated breath. In a world marred by conflict, as the war in Ukraine escalates dramatically, tensions reach a boiling point. Once again, European leaders are stirring the pot, leading to heated exchanges and ominous threats. Among those at the forefront is Theo Franken, Belgium's Minister of Defense, whose audacious statement about retaliation against Russia has caught the attention of the Kremlin. What did Franken say that triggered such a fierce response? Here's a closer look. Franken, in an interview, boldly asserted that if Russia were to unleash missiles upon Brussels, the response would be monumental: we'd flatten Moscow. This assertion sent shockwaves across Europe and prompted the Dutch, Belgian, and even NATO officials to reconsider their stance. The statement came with context: Franken's refusal to entertain the idea that Putin might target Brussels. He confidently declared that such an attack would hit the heart of NATO, leading to a swift and overwhelming counter-response. But was he provoking the bear too much? Moscow's reaction was swift and furious, illustrating the rising tensions between Russia and NATO countries. The Kremlin fired back at Franken's remarks, hinting at grave consequences. As we dive deeper, the implications of such rhetoric become clear. Amid escalating threats, Putin faces the specter of global retaliation. But why does he hold back? Could it be an acute awareness of the potential devastation his own country could suffer? As Franken navigated the complexities of military alliances, he questioned America's commitment to NATO and the validity of Trump's ambiguous portrayals of Article 5. The dialogue reveals anxieties and biases, driven by a desire for security amid swirling chaos. With NATO's collective power at their fingertips, how will the alliance respond? Then came the shocking twist. Franken dismissed the notion that Russia's military might could stifle progress in Ukraine. Stating that the Ukrainians are not alone, they are propped by Western support, he proclaimed that the Russians are at a disadvantage. But is this optimism justified? As we analyze these statements, we also uncover a dark side to the conflict. Russian veterans returning home face harrowing challenges: mental health struggles, social abandonment, and crime. How will these factors reshape the war's landscape? Are we witnessing an army crumbling from within while its leaders espouse a narrative of strength? The stakes are high, and choices made in this theater will decide the fate of many. What lies ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the impact of war extends far beyond the battlefield. It reverberates through society, shaping the future of nations and their people. As the situation unfolds, both military decisions and social realities will dictate the trajectory of the war. Will humanity find a way to navigate through this turmoil, or are we destined for deeper tragedies? The conflict rages on, and the future hangs in the balance. As the war in Ukraine escalates into a crucial phase, tensions tighten across Europe. Comments made by Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken have ignited a furious response from the Kremlin. While discussing potential repercussions of a Russian missile strike on Brussels, Franken boldly declared, "We would flatten Moscow." This fiery remark reverberated across news outlets and stirred a cascade of reactions, including a clarification from Franken himself. But what happens when words become weapons? The very idea that NATO would respond decisively raises questions about Putin's next move. In an interview, Franken emphasized the significance of NATO's unity, dismissing fears that a Russian attack on Europe would go unanswered. That would strike at the heart of NATO, he insisted. This statement placed NATO's credibility on the line, with challenges rippling through diplomatic corridors. How did Russia respond to such a fiery proclamation? Moscow attempted to assert power through threats of nuclear escalation, yet recent developments suggest fragility within its ranks. recruitment rates have plummeted, leaving fewer volunteers eager to join the fight. In fact, military service currently represents a terrifying gamble, one that can lead to death, execution, or a life marred by economic despair. This ominous trend is thrown into sharp relief as Russia prepares its largest recruitment drive in a decade, desperately trying to replenish its dwindling troops. But the tide appears to be shifting. Ukrainian forces are capitalizing on discontent, achieving impressive territorial gains around Pokrovsk. Using coordinated drone strikes and ground maneuvers, they have systematically encircled Russian units, forcing mass surrenders and overwhelming the enemy's morale. Just days ago, Ukrainian operatives obliterated an entire Russian convoy, including tanks and support vehicles, in what was supposed to be a strategic assault. As casualties mount and troop morale skews, what options remain for Russia? Some analysts warn the Kremlin might resort to desperate measures, launching massive offensives, regardless of losses, to prevent total collapse. Such a course could open Pandora's box, leading to the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons as a last-ditch effort to coerce Ukraine into submission. In this high-stakes drama, the ticking clock raises the question, could we be on the brink of a new era in warfare, where nuclear threats become a normalized tool of conflict? With every passing moment, the stakes grow higher, each decision rippling far beyond the battlefield. The world watches in anticipation as these tumultuous events unfold, hoping for resolution yet fearing the dire consequences of escalation. As the battlefield of Ukraine reaches a critical juncture this week, the stakes have never been higher. European leaders, feeling the tension, have escalated their rhetoric, igniting furious reactions from the Kremlin. One particularly bold statement came from Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken. In an interview, he warned that any missile strike on Brussels by Russia would provoke a decisive NATO response, asserting that Moscow would be wiped off the map. His words sent shockwaves throughout the continent, prompting a swift clarification on social media and raising questions about the implications for the ongoing conflict. Franken's controversial assertion has stirred vigorous debate over NATO's collective defense, especially following a provocative question about the possibility of a Russian strike on Brussels. He confidently declared that such an attack would invoke Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which states an assault on one member is an attack on all. The interviewer challenged him, probing whether he believed that the United States, under President Donald Trump, would uphold this commitment. Franken, taken aback, asserted that America's dedication to its allies remained unwavering, emphasizing the unity that NATO must exhibit against any aggression. As discussions turned to the supply of advanced weaponry to Ukraine, ostensibly pivotal to the conflict's escalation, Franken rebuffed claims that this would trigger a catastrophic Russian response. He reflected on early fears that paralyzed Western nations but asserted that taking action would not only restore balance but could serve to deter Putin effectively. He emphasized that nuclear threats, while grave, could not paralyze the West into inaction. The chilling reality is that should Russia's military face total collapse, Putin could impulsively resort to nuclear options, igniting a potentially disastrous series of retaliatory strikes. Compounding the fears of conventional engagements is the unsettling fact that Russia's military capacity is far more formidable than many assume, evidenced by its ability to produce ammunition at a staggering rate. Yet, dissent looms on the horizon as Russian soldiers return from the front lines disillusioned and angered by the losses they have suffered. This has sparked concerns about the potential for civil unrest in a nation already burdened by war fatigue. The world watched closely as Ukrainians exacted their revenge on Benyamin Metsarin, a figure villainized for his role in the atrocities in Bucha. In a carefully orchestrated assault, this so-called butcher of Bucha met a swift end, a stark reminder that justice may come, albeit painfully slow. Now, with rumblings of revolutionary sentiment brewing amongst returning soldiers, the potential for upheaval within Russia grows stronger by the day. As this bleak narrative unfolds, the global ramifications of these events may shape the future of international relations for years to come. Will the ghosts of the past ignite a fervor for accountability, or will they lead to further despair and wrath? The future remains uncertain, no matter how this harrowing tale continues to be told. In a time of turmoil, where the fate of nations hangs in the balance, Ukraine displayed a fierce resolve, taking significant action against one of the architects of horror, Veniamin Metsarin. Known for unspeakable atrocities, Metsarin met his fate on October 25, 2025, just under the vast Siberian sky, far from the battlefield. The execution of this strike was not only a personal vendetta but a powerful statement of Ukraine's capabilities. This chilling story unfolds deep within Russia's Kemerovo region, a land approximately 2,000 miles from Ukraine's border. On the day of his demise, Metsarin, a 45-year-old lieutenant colonel serving in a notorious unit, drove through this remote expanse, unaware that it would be his final journey. The morning sun rose, casting shadows over his unknown intentions while chaos brewed in silence. In a masterfully orchestrated operation, Ukrainian forces located him with precision. As Metsarin crossed paths with destiny, an explosion rocked the quiet landscape, confirming that Ukraine could reach deep into enemy territory with surgical accuracy. As the dust settled, the echoes of justice reverberated across borders, striking fear into the hearts of other war criminals lurking in the shadows. A startling report released by Ukraine's military intelligence agency detailed the moment of Metsarin's reckoning. Video footage revealed the last moments of a man once feared. A roadside detonator activated and in an instant, flames engulfed the vehicle, marking the end of a legacy steeped in bloodshed. The once menacing figure dissolved into ash and smoke. As the cries for justice found their mark. Through this daring act of vengeance, Ukraine not only eliminated a symbol of tyranny but also sent a potent message, a spark igniting hope for those yearning for freedom and retribution. The road ahead is fraught with challenges, and with names like Metsarin still haunting the shadows, the hunt for justice is far from over. The tension swells. Who will be next to face the reckoning in this unfolding tale of resilience and revenge? On October 25, 2025, the unthinkable happened in the Kemerovo region of Russia. A car erupted in a massive fireball, bringing with it the end of a notorious figure, Metsarin Veniamin Vladimirovich, a war criminal linked to grim violations during the Ukrainian conflict. As the smoke cleared, the world learned that Metsarin, a police lieutenant colonel born in 1980, had been driving a vehicle targeted by operatives bent on justice for the atrocities he had committed. Before his demise, Metsarin was a member of the Oberek unit of the Russian National Guard. This infamous group, shrouded in allegations, was known for its involvement in war crimes against the Ukrainian people since the Russian invasion began in February 2022. As reports emerged from the Ukrainian General Staff, it became clear that Metsarin was not just a soldier, he was a vital cog in a machine fueled by systemic violence and devastation. The Ukrainian military intelligence had been meticulously tracking individuals like Metsarin for years. Back in April 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces had already identified him and his comrades as war criminals. They gathered evidence meticulously, intending to ensure that those responsible for the heinous acts of violence in cities like Bucha would be held accountable. The hunt had intensified, and retribution loomed large on the horizon. Metsarin was known for his particular brutality during the brutal assaults on Ukrainian towns. Eyewitness reports described the unit's horrific actions as part of what would later be defined as a campaign of genocide and terror. Standing at the road's edge, the operatives who orchestrated Metsarin's demise showed no mercy. They pressed a remote detonator, and the silver car erupted into flames. A sense of satisfaction hung thick in the air as the flames consumed any remnants of his regime. As rumors swirled around his fate, Ukrainian officials bravely reiterated their commitment to justice, promising that every act of violence against their people would meet with precise and unyielding consequences. "We will not forget," they proclaimed, underscoring their resolve to ensure that no act of barbarism would go unpunished. On the ground, towns like Bucha, once tranquil and sleepy, were now sites of horror that defined a dark chapter in modern history. The world, previously unaware of such places, took notice as stories of resilience emerged from the ashes of despair. With the death of Metsarin, a pivotal moment turned in the conflict. But what does this mean for the future of Ukraine? One question hangs in the balance. As the tides of war shift, will justice truly prevail, or will the shadows of conflict continue to haunt the nation? The storm is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun. A colossal wave of military might surged towards the heart of Ukraine. Russian tanks, armored troops, and an array of formidable machinery flooded into the outskirts of Kiev. Their intentions were clear: to unfurl the Russian flag over a nation yearning for freedom. Yet the path to this urban stronghold was fraught with treacherous hurdles, extending miles through a landscape of towns and villages, each one a silent witness to the unfolding chaos. Among these locales was Bucha, a town known to few outside Ukraine. Initially home to about 37,000 individuals, it was a quiet place, untouched by the swells of global attention. But that tranquility shattered like glass on February 27, 2022, when Russian ground forces breached Bucha's borders. An overwhelming array of military power, including tanks and special operations units, began their assault. Artillery unleashed a rain of destruction, obliterating buildings and shattering lives. How could such a modest town defend itself against this deluge? In less than 2 weeks, the Russians seized control, yet defiance still flickered in the hearts of Bucha's residents. Individuals fought back, crafting makeshift Molotov cocktails that erupted against the foe's vehicles, symbolizing fierce resistance amidst adversity. In early March, amid the chaos, some civilians managed to escape, ushered out by Ukrainian forces desperately clinging to remnants of hope. Yet as Russian artillery intensified, the end seemed inevitable. By March 12, Bucha fell entirely into Kremlin hands. However, what followed was a glimmer of resilience. Ukrainian forces strategized a counteroffensive. Triumphantly, at the end of the month, Bucha was liberated, momentarily serving as a beacon of hope. But as the dust settled, the horrors that unfolded within the town began to materialize. What truly transpired in those days of occupation? For the world, Bucha would soon transform from an obscure town into a symbol of both valor and abomination in the relentless tide of warfare. As Ukrainian forces surged forward at the end of the month, Bucha fell back under their control, a fleeting victory sending waves of hope across the nation. Yet, in the shadows of triumph, a nightmare unfolded, whispers of horror growing louder as they pieced together the city's scars. Shocking visuals flooded online feeds, unveiling grisly counts of innocent lives lost, mangled remains of men, women, and children crammed into makeshift burial pits. Proof of savage brutality surfaced, including signs of savage blows, torment, violations, and cold-blooded killings, with countless victims discovered bound by makeshift restraints, their cries forever silenced in the soil. Imagine the stench of decay clinging to the air, the metallic tang of blood soaking the earth. What dark secrets did the retreating Russians leave behind in Bucha, secrets that would ignite global outrage and shatter illusions of a swift end to the conflict? The city's aching echoes revealed early omens of Russian atrocities during the initial clash. Sporadic accounts surfaced of soldiers ambushing civilian rides and spraying gunfire on defenseless locals, confining families indoors with brief releases only to prepare meals or haul lifeless forms. Just days after the invasion's first hammer blow on February 27, a local reporter detailed how occupying troops gunned down a civilian car, snuffing out one man's life and mangling another. Feel the jolt of fear, the crunch of tires skidding, the acrid smoke lingering like a poisonous fog. Can ordinary errands turn into deadly traps under the gaze of invaders? And just how far into the abyss did these acts pull an entire community? Slipping forward to March 4, a gut-wrenching tale erupted, etching the brutality in sharper relief. A heavy SUV rolled through Bucha's ravaged lanes, carrying 3 young Ukrainians in their 20s, brave souls venturing out to stock an animal haven with dwindling dog rations. Headed to a kin's refuge, they zipped onward, hearts pounding against the thunder of nearby shells. Suddenly, a Russian convoy loomed, unleashing a hail of shots that ripped through the vehicle, claiming all 3 lives in an instant of shattered glass and screams. Then, the following dawn on March 5, terror gripped 2 families fleeing the relentless barrage. Shaken and desperate, they loaded vehicles for a westward dash to the hamlet of Ramanivka, dreaming of refuge. In a caravan of 2 cars, they broke free into the street, only to face annihilation. A Russian armored beast spotted them, its roar splitting the air as volleys struck, butchering a mother and her boys in one ride and downing a father in the other. Picture the chill of dawn, the rumble of engines fading into silence, the raw despair as loved ones crumpled in pools of crimson. Were these isolated outbursts, or the tip of a monstrous iceberg waiting to emerge? Such chilling narratives blazed worldwide amid the skirmishes, but true fathomless depths surfaced only upon Ukraine's recapture. With Russians ousted and Ukrainian fighters sweeping in on April 1st, the veil lifted on what would be dubbed the Bukha slaughter. Emotions swirled in a tempest of rage and sorrow. Tying into broader war narratives where posturing met raw horror, but here the personal losses cut deepest, exposing how far aggression had warped humanity. As Ukrainians grieved openly, from the oblast's heart to global shores, sobs uniting over the carnage. Whispers of crimes against humanity had simmered from the battle's outset, yet now, the raw evidence demanded reckoning. Has this tragedy marked a turning point, or does it foreshadow even darker spirals ahead? As the unthinkable horrors of abduction, abuse, and torture gripped the region, residents shared chilling tales of pregnant victims and systematic deaths, echoing a resident's desperate words about survival amid the torment. Imagine this: could a deliberate sniper boastfully taking down civilians in windows, with no military reason, expose the darkest face of war? In Bucha, they did just that. The air hung heavy with the smell of fear and gunpowder, as screams pierced the silence of devastated streets. Bodies lay strewn, hands bound, bullets to the back, each execution a cold execution without cause or trial. Feel the roughness of ropes on wrists, the sting of betrayal twisting like a knife. Why target innocent souls peering from shattered apartments? It wasn't strategy, it was sadism. Civilians turned into targets for perverse pleasure. Another block revealed even grimmer scenes, flesh marked by torment, lives extinguished in basements that reeked of damp earth and despair. One resident's voice trembled, confirming the neighbor's accounts. It was cold-blooded efficiency, a machine grinding through humanity. Russia rushed to downplay it all, denying crimes with hollow words that crumbled under relentless proof. Evidence piled up like shadows refusing to fade. Reporters from across the globe descended, their cameras capturing corpses in gutters and ruins whispering stories of loss. Video feeds showed soldiers firing on fleeing fathers, armored beasts unleashing fury on families. Independent analyses verified the horrors, from charred buildings to desperate faces frozen in time. Was this mere rumor? Or an irrefutable nightmare? We may never tally every soul lost to baseless cruelty, but numbers climbed like a fever, 280 in graves, then 300, edging to 400, surpassing 500 as more remains surfaced from pits. Wider in Bucha, outlets like the BBC reported over 1,000 slain civilians in mere weeks. An incomprehensible slaughter, resounding across history. The world recoiled, shocked by Russia's raw aggression laid bare. Yet, from this abyss rose Ukraine's unyielding vow. Military leaders, fueled by rage and justice, swore retribution. Intelligence experts dived in, compiling dossiers on the culprits, their names etched, ages noted, locations pinpointed, ranks whispered. But who will face the reckoning, and what unspeakable tools will Ukraine unveil in the hunt? The hunt intensifies. As the conflict in Ukraine reaches a pivotal moment, tensions escalate not only on the battlefield but also in rhetoric among European leaders. Recently, Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken sparked an international uproar with a bold statement, claiming that if Russia launched missiles at Brussels, the response would be catastrophic for Moscow. His exact words suggested that Brussels would retaliate by wiping Moscow off the map. This fiery comment has drawn sharp reactions from the Kremlin, including tense remarks from President Vladimir Putin himself. Franken's assertion emerged in an interview where he addressed concerns about a potential Russian missile strike on Brussels. He confidently dismissed the fear, indicating that any attack on NATO territory would prompt a decisive military response. However, his comments ignited controversy as they required clarification on social media, highlighting the gravity of his words and the potential implications for international relations. The interviewer probed further, questioning Franken about NATO's commitment under Article 5, which obliges member states to respond in the event of an attack. This led to a heated exchange regarding the flexibility of NATO's obligations, especially in light of past statements from former President Donald Trump, which left room for interpretation. Despite the diverse perspectives on NATO's military assertions, Franken is unyielding in his stance that the United States would stand by its allies, particularly in the face of an aggression. He criticized the notion that the U.S. might falter in its promise to support NATO conclusively. As tensions in Ukraine evolve, each new development influences the military dynamics of the region and puts considerable pressure on leaders to address the challenges posed by Russia's advancing military capabilities. Amidst the rising stakes, Ukraine's military leadership is responding with heightened determination. Following a series of aggressive Russian actions, they have begun drafting plans for retribution against their aggressors, specifically focusing on key figures who have committed egregious acts against innocents. As they comb through intelligence and identify those responsible, an atmosphere of vengeance and justice brews under the surface, promising future confrontations. In an unnerving backdrop of bravado, a chilling event unfolded. Ukraine's intelligence began forming a hit list targeting senior officers with direct links to war crimes, among them Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vladimirovich Metsarin. While the specifics of his crimes remained shadows in the chaos of war, Ukraine's resolve to prosecute all involved leads them to meticulously track his every move. What would happen when they finally caught up with him? This story doesn't just exist in the distant fog of war, it's unfolding. As agents prepare for the inevitable moment of action, the stakes rise through the air, thick with tension. Would the shadows of vengeance obscure the path to peace? Only time will tell as twists emerge and the battle between retaliation and restraint continues to rage. In a world gripped by conflict, deadly games are played both in the shadows and on the front lines. How far will nations go in their pursuit of justice? What price will they pay for revenge? As the clock ticks and decisions hang in the balance, every move could tip the scales in unimaginable directions. Will the desire for retribution ignite a firestorm, escalating the horror and pain, or will it pave the way to a transformative reckoning? The answers lie just beyond the horizon, waiting to unfold. Imagine the shock rippling through the Kremlin like a thunderclap echoing across icy plains. Can a tiny nation like Lithuania really topple the bear's relentless machine, or is Vladimir Putin about to unleash his fury in ways no one foresaw? Shifting gears from Europe's defiant stance, where allies like Lithuania push boundaries with unwavering support for Ukraine, the narrative deepens with astonishing determination. Even Russia seems stunned by Lithuania's extreme measures to bolster Kiev, making Moscow's war efforts tremble if more nations step up. On a crisp October 28, drama unfolded as newly elected Lithuanian Parliament Speaker Jonas Olaf journeyed to Ukraine for his inaugural official trip. Kas, a seasoned figure with past roles as defense minister and European Parliament member, carries the weight of political battles etched into his lined face, his voice steady amid the chill of uncertainty. In Kiev, he navigated corridors buzzing with urgency, meeting key figures, Ruslan Stefanchuk, chair of Ukraine's parliament, Denis Shmyhal, the prime minister, and President Volodymyr Zelensky, whose grip on Kas's hand transmitted the pulse of a nation under siege. Amid the hum of cameras and the faint scent of heated debates in smoky rooms, Kas shared insightful talks with journalists, peeling back layers of Lithuania's bold aid. What drives him? A fervent vision for genuine peace, one that echoes through war-torn streets without compromise. He pondered accelerating Ukraine's path to the European Union, weaving threads of reinforced security, collaborative industrial ventures, and alliances that ripple globally. Then, Kas dropped declarations that reverberated like dropped bombs. To the Kremlin, a stern message rang out: Lithuania flatly rejects the seizure of Ukrainian lands. Territories such as Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk will never be seen as Russian, no matter the deceptions or battlefield turns. Through howling winds and shadowed threats, Lithuania vows eternal solidarity with Ukraine, PSHHH. No yielding, no land concessions in workable accords. This stance strikes deep, for Putin craves more than mere soil, he lusts after expanded dominion and prestige that inflate his image. Desperately, he spins tales to sway citizens and the world, painting his aggression as righteous, or does he? The air thickens with intrigue. How will Putin's next ploy unfold, and will Lithuania's defiance ignite an even fiercer storm across continents? In the shadow of escalating tensions, where alliances tremble and leaders hurl defiant words across borders, a Belgian defense minister's bold proclamation ignited a firestorm. Sparks flew as remarks from Theo Franken clashed with Kremlin fury, unveiling layers of a war that hinges on unwavering resolve. Amid the clash, we glimpsed Russia's hypersonic threats, a so-called hazelnut missile tearing through defenses like a blazing comet. Ukraine's allies muster their might, dismissing fears and sharpening steel, yet the question lingers, will defiance truly erase Moscow's grip? Picture the sting in the air, electric and sharp, as Franken's voice cut through the interview like a sudden thunderclap, threatening to level Moscow itself if Russia dares strike Brussels. His words echoed, humiliating Putin's bluster, turning the tables on the oppressor in a global humiliation. The interviewer's needle pricked deeper. Could Trump truly uphold NATO's sacred vow? Franken lashed back, exasperated, calling out Europe's bias against America as ludicrous. Why wouldn't America stand firm? The clause, with its dance of definitions, grants wiggle room, yet Franken scoffed, dismissing Trump's quips as mere fog. America pledged 100% support to NATO allies in June, he fired back, a missile on Brussels? That's a no-brainer. No opting out. This clash exposed the fragility of pledges, where a single utterance could shatter empires. What if the unthinkable happened, a Russian strike on the heart of NATO? The air would thicken with the acrid scent of dread, sirens wailing through fog-shrouded streets. Concrete trembling under the boot of retaliation. Franken painted doom, we'd flatten Moscow, or wipe it from the face of the earth, pounding it into oblivion with overwhelming might. His retorts soared over doubts, mocking Putin's nuclear saber-rattling as the eve of apocalypse. Nuclear horrors? No, because we supply Ukraine with Tomahawks, tanks, F-16s. Red lines? We must stomp on them, Franken insisted, or prolong the agony through fear. Russia's economy churns out ammunition at 4 times NATO's pace, its GDP a beast when measured in purchasing power, ranking 4th globally, a $6.909 trillion giant towering over nominal figures. Fear them? Absolutely. They've clawed victories in Chechnya, Syria's sands for a decade, Africa's shadowed fields. Europe? We're disjointed, a mere handful of Eurocorps troops in Strasbourg, no lightning-ready force to deploy. Ukraine stands because of Western arms, money, unrelenting voices that drown out Putin's propaganda. Without us? Overwhelming defeat would have engulfed them long ago. Suddenly, the twist, a shocking betrayal in Franken's gaze. The Russians don't break through in Ukraine not due to inferiority, but because they face the entire collective West marshalling against them. The revelation stings like a slap, appending narratives of stalemates, forcing viewers to question, is this war truly about borders, or a cage match of ideologies where surrender means global irrelevance? The cliffhanger looms, can nations unite to starve Russia's empire ambitions forever? In the dim glow of parliaments, where voices rise like storm winds lashing against ancestral walls, leaders rally to expose Putin's imperial dream. Kievan shocks ripple outward, a domino fall of defiance that humiliates the Kremlin's delusion. Our prior revelation unveiled the war's true crux. Ukraine's fight channels Western strength, turning what could be total rout into a defiant stand, a pivot that exposes Russia's reliance on fear, not might alone. Now, delve into the soul of this geopolitical storm, where denial of legitimacy brands Russia as a pariah for generations. Putin craves far more than Ukrainian soil. He lusts to inflate his terror across the globe, to repackage invasion as righteous conquest. The smell of his propaganda clings, sweet and deceitful, as he bombards his people and foreign ears with tales of liberation, urging the world to swallow his narrative whole. Lithuania's parliament pierced this veil in Vilnius, vowing unbreakable support to Kiev. Their pledge echoes through the damp chill of European halls, steadfast military aid, no retreat, security shields uplifted. Aid won't falter, they declare, a lifeline pulsing with constancy. But if nations echo this chorus, calling Russia's crusade what it is, an orgy of unjust war crimes spanning Donetsk's wounds to broader atrocities, then Putin's crown shatters. Trade ties to Europe and North America disintegrate like crumbling mortar, the international spotlight dims Russia's seat at grand councils. No amnesty awaits, the world's rebuke intensifies daily, stealing Ukraine's independence with global arms and hearts. Imagine the tactile weight of isolation, Russia's veins constricting under sanctions' icy grip. Elites and citizens alike groping through darkness, businesses hemorrhaging in silent voids. Yet Ukraine blooms in allies' embrace, compassion weaving through their ranks like warm threads binding wounds. The call amplifies, follow Lithuania's torch, denounce Kursk and Luhansk as eternally Ukrainian, no crown for Putin's dominion. Will this stand humiliate Russia's farce, or will fear's chains hold nations captive? Then, the quake, Lithuania's speaker unleashes thunder, rocking Kiev and Moscow in seismic waves. Sanctions must tighten, choking Russia's breath, yet he glimpses no endgame, no signals of peace from the Kremlin. Only a seismic tilt in power scales can compel Russia to kneel. This forecast, sharp as shattering glass, twists perspectives anew. Is the end not battlefield, but economic strangulation? The cliffhanger grips, as deployments of P-16s and Rheinmetall tractors surge in December, hinting at a tide that could drown Putin's blitz, or unleash retaliation's fury. In a world where conflict brews perilously close to home, a chilling declaration ignites a fierce exchange between European leaders and the Russian Kremlin. As war rages in Ukraine, a bold statement from Belgium's Minister of Defense shakes the foundations of diplomacy and raises stakes on the battlefield. What did he say that sent ripples through the heart of Russia? During an intense interview, Theo Franken extrapolated a scenario: should Moscow launch a strike on Brussels, the response from NATO would be nothing short of cataclysmic. "We'd flatten Moscow," he claimed, words that echoed like a battle cry across the continent. The line sparked outrage from the Kremlin, in a rapidly escalating war of words. But what did these declarations truly mean for the future of Europe and Ukraine? Franken's assertion caught the eye of international media, stirring a potent mix of fear and resolve. In response to whether he feared a Russian missile aimed at Brussels, his reply was firm and resolute. He dismissed the notion, emphasizing that to strike the heart of NATO would be met with overwhelming military force. The use of the phrase "wipe it from the face of the earth" raised eyebrows. Could it have been a slip of language, or was there underlying intent? As the interview progressed, an intriguing dialogue unfolded regarding NATO's commitment to collective defense, especially concerning President Trump's earlier comments that sowed doubt and distrust. Of course, he will respect Article 5. Franken argued vehemently. But with history as a witness, could the assurances hold under the pressure of aggression? In the backdrop of this fiery exchange, Ukraine's plight is laid bare. The specter of unhindered Russian aggression looms large. Could NATO's hesitation to intervene be interpreted as weakness? Perhaps there's wisdom in Franken's stance, perhaps resilience is forged in the crucible of such challenging battles. With heavy investments from NATO allies and a resolve to continue military support, he asserted that Ukraine is not fighting alone. Consider this, he urged as the discussion escalated, it costs Ukraine nearly $172 million each day to sustain its defense. The financial burden was staggering, a reality that weighed heavily on every Ukrainian citizen. In stark contrast, Lithuania pledged a determined commitment, offering at least 0.25% of its GDP, a significant number for a nation of its size. Yet, amidst this attitude of defiance and honor, questions linger. Is Ukraine's extraordinary commitment that of a warrior spirit or an echo of desperation? The narrative unfolds: can alliances become lifeboats in choppy seas? With every missile fired, every economic decision made, the future of nations hangs perilously. As international tensions simmer, the answers may lie just ahead. What consequences await those who stir a sleeping giant? Stay tuned as revelations shift, and the landscape of war and peace is rewritten. Will history praise those who dared to confront, or will it condemn them as the architects of calamity? In the heart of Europe, a new chapter of tension unfolds, drawing the world's eyes to the gritty battleground of Ukraine. As hostilities rage on, a daring comment from Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken sends shockwaves rippling through the diplomatic landscape. He boldly states that should Russia dare to strike Brussels, they would wipe Moscow off the map. Did such audacious words ignite a firestorm? Absolutely. The Kremlin's furious backlash reverberates through the airwaves, and Vladimir Putin's subsequent statements hint at a chilling escalation of conflict. With provocative questions in the air, the urgency mounts. What does this mean for the ongoing war? During an interview, Franken's words strike a chord, whether translated as complete obliteration or a mere flattening of an infamous city. Each interpretation stirs debate. Our investigative journey will unravel the potency of these phrases, their implications in the geopolitical chess match, and why Franken felt compelled to clarify his stance. But wait, the implications of this dialogue reveal a deeper concern. Yet, beneath the hard-hitting responses, lies a fear and respect for the second most powerful military in the world. Putin's nuclear threats have escalated before, as seen when Ukraine attacked the Kerch Bridge, sparking a fierce Russian retaliation. But how does Ukraine's strategy, a calculated response, evolve against such intimidation? As Franken suggests, the narrative shifts and growth may lie in allowing aggression to meet decisive and united resistance. Gathering intelligence from various fronts. Our tale dives deeper into these complex dynamics. Ukraine's resolve is bolstered by Western support. But it's not just weaponry, it's also a financial commitment that European nations need to address. Countries like the UK provide substantial military aid, but how much more could be achieved if they committed to a greater percentage of their GDP? Explore the vision of bolstering Ukraine's war effort through a mere fraction of financial wherewithal, realizing that every bit counts in the age of warfare. Franken dismisses the idea that NATO should fear Russia's military prowess, casting light on their operational efficiencies. While some might say the Russians are faltering in Ukraine, Franken cautiously counters, asserting that they are not merely battling Ukraine. They are entangled in a conflict against the entire West, armed with support the likes of which Ukraine could hardly muster alone. As the interview spins toward an unexpected climax, will nations step up their commitments in the shadow of this fraught dialogue? Each military nuance, every economic calculation matters, but the stakes rise higher. Many European powers harbor the potential to lift their aid contributions, echoing Lithuania's call for greater accountability. This marks a turning point. Will they answer the call, or remain paralyzed by indecision? Sink into the pulse of this unfolding saga, where geopolitical maneuvers collide with raw human emotion. The question lingers, will Europe unify against the looming specter of Russian aggression, or does the continent risk fragmentation and despair? The answers lie only in the future, revealing new dimensions of challenges and alliances. Stay tuned, this story is only just beginning. As the war in Ukraine reaches a critical juncture, tensions escalate. European leaders, particularly Belgium's Minister of Defense, Theo Franken, made waves with a bold statement regarding Russia's missile threats. In an interview, he declared that if Russia were to attack Brussels, the response would be cataclysmic, we'd wipe Moscow off the map. This striking remark sent ripples through Europe, prompting Franken to clarify his comments to avoid backlash from the Kremlin. What does this mean for the ongoing conflict? Franken was addressing concerns about a potential Russian missile strike on Brussels, emphasizing that such an attack would hit the heart of NATO. He confidently dismissed fears, asserting that an assault on NATO territory would trigger overwhelming military action against Russia. The interviewer pressed him further about the reliability of American support under President Trump, who had previously made ambiguous remarks on NATO commitments. Franken defended the alliance, affirming that America would stand firm against any aggressor. The stakes have risen dramatically. Russia had consistently threatened nuclear escalation with each military aid provided to Ukraine by NATO countries. Yet, Franken brushed off these dangers, stating, Putin knows he can't use nuclear weapons without facing annihilation. The realization crept in, diplomacy might be futile. The cycle of aggression perpetuated by Moscow shows no signs of easing up. Moving into strategic discussions, Franken challenged the notion that NATO was significantly outgunned. while claiming that NATO possesses numerical superiority. He painted a different picture of Russian military capabilities as robust and fearsome. Russia's ammunition production reportedly dwarfs NATO's output, leading one to question the true balance of power. In a shocking twist, as the interviewer probed deeper, Franken volleyed back, asserting that although the Russians are struggling in Ukraine, they aren't fighting alone, they have the backing of Western nations. This perspective shifts the narrative, suggesting that the battle for survival isn't just on the Ukrainian front, but rather an intensified struggle involving global stakes. The intriguing conclusion left hanging: if Ukraine is indeed fighting with Western support, how long can this war extend? With so much on the line, is there a way forward that might finally bring peace, or will the wheels of conflict continue to turn, dragging in more nations and igniting further chaos? As tensions rise in Eastern Europe, one question looms large: how far will nations go to defend their sovereignty? Recent military and diplomatic maneuvers hint at an escalating conflict, with potential consequences that could reshape the region. Lithuania stands at the forefront, standing firm against Russian encroachments, and recently called upon a Russian diplomat amid heightened airspace violations. On October 23, Lithuanian officials summoned a diplomat to seek answers for an alarming breach when a Russian Sukhoi Su-30 fighter jet and an Il-78 tanker were spotted entering their airspace from Kaliningrad. Lithuania's call for an explanation was urgent, demanding swift preventive measures from the Kremlin to avoid further provocations. The situation took a turn for the worse as airspace violations continued. Fast forward to October 29. Lithuania's leaders made a bold move to close the country's border with Belarus until at least November 30. This decision came in response to several bizarre incidents where Belarusian weather balloons, allegedly carrying contraband, drifted across the border. As these balloons invaded Lithuanian airspace, Vilnius airport faced recurring shutdowns, stirring fears among citizens that these acts could be part of a larger scheme aimed to destabilize the nation. The Lithuanian government did not mince words. They boldly stated they would take any necessary actions, including shooting down any further balloons entering their space. This decisive stance sends a resounding message to both Belarus and Russia: Lithuania will not tolerate attempts to instill fear or disruption among its people. Despite not having the military might of larger EU nations, Lithuania has emerged as a symbol of resilience and support for Ukraine. Its commitment reflects a determination to combat aggression and uphold peace within Europe. The nation spent its resources wisely, challenging its neighbors while reinforcing its alliances within the EU. The lingering question remains: will other nations rise to the challenge, or will they remain passive as tensions intensify? Watch closely as this situation unfolds. Who will act next in this complex web of geopolitical chess? The stakes have never been higher. As the conflict in Ukraine reaches a critical juncture, tension mounts on the battlefield. European leaders are amplifying their rhetoric, leading to fierce reactions from Russia. A bold statement from Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken that if Brussels were attacked, NATO would retaliate decisively, claiming they would flatten Moscow, set off a firestorm. This audacious declaration not only made headlines but also forced Franken to respond to escalating backlash from the Kremlin. What does it mean for NATO's collective security? Franken spoke boldly during an interview, dismissing fears over a potential Russian missile strike on Brussels. He asserted that such an act would provoke a catastrophic response, shaking the very foundations of Moscow. But with NATO's strength on the line, doubts lingered. As Franken defended his position against skeptical questions about the solidness of NATO's defense, he made it clear: trust is vital, insisting that allies must stand united to deter Russian aggression. With complex international tensions unfolding, he challenged notions of Russian invincibility, emphasizing that their war economy now outpaces NATO in munition production. Amidst swirling doubts regarding military readiness, he painted a stark image: Russia is not merely a paper tiger, it wields formidable military strength and a history of resilient conquests. The determination of Lithuania to bolster its defenses illustrates this reality: facing potential threats, they are preparing for the worst. Franken continued, highlighting the delicate balance of global power dynamics. His assertion that Ukraine fought but due to NATO support sparked debate. Without our aid, he argued, they would have been overwhelmed. The haunting question looms: how far will NATO go to support its allies, risking a direct confrontation with Russia? Yet, the challenge remains immense. As NATO fortifies its alliances, the struggle for coordinated military strategy persists amid widespread skepticism. What path will this complex conflict unveil? With global stakes escalating, the battlefield is not just a matter of land, but of influence and survival, where each misstep could spiral into chaos. Just as the situation heats up, new developments surface. Lithuania is stepping up its military game, implementing measures to protect its airspace against potential incursions from Russian and Belarusian forces. The nation has shared its grim resolve to respond to aerial threats decisively, showcasing a fierce commitment to defend its territory. In light of these unfolding narratives, the chilling reality of modern warfare emerges. Countries are not just drawing lines in the sand, they are preparing for an uncertain future where diplomatic negotiations may falter under military duress. As the world watches, one thing is certain: the stage is set for a potentially explosive confrontation that could review the nature of warfare in Europe. Stay tuned as new reports unfold, revealing the intricate tapestry of alliances and animosities at play. What will the next chapter hold, as nations grapple with the specter of escalation? In a chilling turn of events, as the war in Ukraine pushes towards a critical climax, European leaders have ramped up their rhetoric, igniting a fierce backlash from Moscow. Just this week, Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, made a startling declaration during an interview. He stated that any Russian missile strike on Brussels would lead to a decisive response, claiming, "We'd wipe Moscow off the map." This jaw-dropping assertion sent shockwaves throughout Europe, provoking an immediate reaction from the Kremlin, with President Putin making ominous statements in return. Franken's comments sparked a media frenzy, forcing him to clarify his statements on social platforms. The gravity of his words stemmed from a concern about Putin's potential aggression against NATO nations, specifically, whether Brussels could become a target. When pressed about the likelihood of an attack, Franken boldly expressed confidence: if it were to happen, it would strike at the heart of NATO. "We would retaliate with full force." The interview didn't stop there. When asked about President Trump's previous ambiguous views on the NATO treaty and America's commitment to defend its allies, Franken expressed his disbelief. Why would Trump not uphold Article 5? America stands firmly with NATO. This defensiveness revealed a palpable tension surrounding transatlantic relations and ongoing support for Ukraine amid rising threats. As the conversation progressed, the reporter questioned the perceived effectiveness of NATO's military strength against Russian capabilities. In a twist of startling insight, Franken pointed out, the Russians have ramped up production. They outpace us significantly in ammunition. It became increasingly clear that while Ukraine's forces have relied on NATO support, they are also engaged in a deadly struggle against a formidable opponent. This realization hung heavily in the air, a confrontation not just between governments, but between ideologies. Shifting gears, let's dive into the heart-rending impact of war on civilians. In a somber, devastating account, as Ukrainian forces regained control of Bucha, grim discoveries spotlighted the horrific realities of the conflict. Eyewitnesses revealed chilling instances of brutality, tales of systematic killings, torture, and merciless executions. Survivors recounted horror stories of being confined in their homes, living in fear as sniper fire rang out, targeting anyone who dared to step outside. Villagers described nighttime fears, the weight of starvation, and the constant prayers for their survival. Streets once filled with life now bore witness to unimaginable cruelty, as brutal attacks left mutilated bodies scattered, some even rigged with explosives, a final act of malice by retreating forces. People shared harrowing experiences of confrontations with soldiers, houses ransacked, cherished belongings destroyed, and families torn apart. Continuing on, chilling voices emerged from the darkness, a narrative of women and girls abducted, imprisoned, and subjected to unspeakable acts. The tales of horror were relentless. Residents painted a picture of human suffering on a grotesque scale. pointing to a need for justice in the wake of such atrocities. The impact of these revelations rippled far beyond Bucha. Would the world break its silence? Would there be justice for the fallen? As the specter of war loomed large, the real battles were fought not just in the streets, but in the hearts and minds of those who had endured unspeakable horrors. The question remains, can humanity rise against such darkness, or is the cycle of violence destined to repeat? In a world gripped by conflict, dark shadows linger where power and pain intertwine. As the war in Ukraine reaches a critical turning point, European leaders have taken their stance to new heights. A recent bold statement from Belgium's Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, has sparked a fierce response from the Kremlin. When asked about the possibility of a Russian missile strike on Brussels, his chilling reply was clear: "We would flatten Moscow." This provocative comment sent shockwaves across Europe, transforming a diplomatic inquiry into a battle of words with dire implications. After the interview was published, the Kremlin's fury was palpable. The notion of NATO's retaliation stung, entering the public discourse as a stark reminder of the stakes involved. As Franken defended his declaration, he dismissed fears of Putin's nuclear threats, insisting that any use of such weapons would lead to Russia's own destruction. His assertion that support for Ukraine must be unwavering reveals the undercurrents of an escalating conflict. But can the West truly rely on its allies in their darkest hours? Franken's comments came amidst a history of names fading into oblivion. Those who have orchestrated suffering in Ukraine seem to find themselves in the sights of retribution. The GUR, Ukraine's military intelligence, has claimed responsibility for several targeted operations, hunting down those involved in the torture and execution of innocent civilians. The assassination of Kremlin-appointed politician Mikhail Filipenko by a car bomb serves as yet another chilling reminder that mercy is not on the agenda for those who perpetrated atrocities. The grim fate that awaits those implicated grows clearer by the day. As Ukraine tracks down its enemies, the sense of urgency intensifies. Each step is a message that justice knows no borders. The atrocities committed leave deep scars not easily healed, but with every successful operation, echoes of hope emerge for the families forever changed by violence. In a resolute highlight of solidarity, Lithuania has proven an extraordinary ally in this narrative, reasserting its commitment to Ukraine amid the chaos. Its actions signal a collective awakening among European nations, a call to arms, urging others to join the fight against Moscow's aggressive expansion. If the rest of Europe follows Lithuania's lead, the very foundation of the Kremlin's ambitions could be shaken to its core. As the war rages on, the tension builds, a perpetual struggle of light against darkness. Brave defenders stand on the front lines, not only of territory but of ideals. Each missile fired, each vow made, reverberates throughout the continent, a reminder that hope can emerge from the ashes of despair, and that true power lies in unwavering solidarity against tyranny. What fate awaits the masterminds behind unspeakable cruelty? As alliances strengthen and resolve solidifies, the answer could tip the scales in this impending global showdown. As tensions simmer in Europe, a recent fiery exchange between Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken and the Kremlin reveals the ever-volatile landscape of international relations. Franken boldly declared that if Russia dared to strike Brussels, the response would be devastating: "We'd wipe Moscow from the map." His words sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles and ignited a blazing response from Russian officials, who deemed his statements as reckless and detached from reality. Unfolding against the backdrop of a war escalating in Ukraine, the stakes are high. Belgium's foreign minister faced heated follow-up questions about NATO's integrity, particularly regarding the United States' commitment under Article 5 of the NATO treaty. In dismissing concerns about America's resolve, Franken bluntly remarked, "Why wouldn't he respect our alliances?" This ignited murmurs about past U.S. hesitations on NATO commitments, drawing on President Trump's controversial comments. But as the discussion deepened, so did the concerns around Russian military capabilities. Franken voiced unease about the prospect of a targeted missile strike against Belgium, a fear exacerbated by recent developments in Russian weaponry, particularly hypersonic systems like the Oreshnik, capable of hitting targets at extreme speeds and distances. The Russians can now strike most of Europe, he warned, highlighting how these advancements have reshaped the security dynamic on the continent. In this precarious atmosphere, the idea of a nuclear confrontation remains a daunting specter. Yet, Franken suggests that asymmetric threats, such as a cyber or conventional assault, pose a more imminent danger than a nuclear war, which he considers a bleak, dystopian fantasy. To prepare, he keeps an emergency kit ready, including essentials like bottled water, canned goods, and a battery-operated radio for communication during potential crises. During the pandemic, people panicked. "I won't wait for the stores to restock," he emphasized, envisioning a swift breakdown of order. However, the Kremlin was quick to respond. Their official stance, delivered through statements on social media, brushed aside Franken's rhetoric, calling it abnormal and utterly disconnected from reality. The Russian embassy in Belgium ridiculed the notion of believing Belgians would carry out their threats. Loud claims were made, yet there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension behind such brazen words. In this swirling atmosphere of bravado and fear, what does the future hold? Will NATO remain steadfast, or has the Russian bear truly awakened? The war in Ukraine continues to unfold, and as we move forward, the lines between security and provocation blur further. Can Franken's words, seen as clickbait, ignite a genuine shift in Europe's military strategy? Or does the Kremlin's rattling of sabers obscure a deeper fragility within Russia's military ambitions? As we dissect these coinciding narratives, the urgency of understanding becomes ever clearer in an age where threats sometimes overshadow the truth. As the conflict in Ukraine escalates, the stakes have never been higher. This week, a powerful remark from a European leader ignited a fiery reaction from Moscow, sending shockwaves through the political landscape. In an interview that would echo across the continent, Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade Theo Franken declared that if Russia launched a missile attack on Brussels, the response from NATO would be undeniable. His bold claim? "We would flatten Moscow." This provocative statement exploded across media platforms, prompting Franken to clarify his words soon after. So, what exactly did he say, and how did the Kremlin respond? The phrase used to convey NATO's potential response was interpreted in two ways: either "we'd wipe it from the face of the earth" or "we'd flatten Moscow." Such interpretations drew the ire of many, no matter the exact wording. When questioned about the likelihood of a missile threat from Putin, Franken was resolute, asserting, "No, because that would strike at the heart of NATO. Then we would flatten Moscow." His interviewer, Ralph Likens, pressed further, diving into the reliability of U.S. commitments to NATO under Article 5, referencing a prior remark from former President Trump that raised eyebrows about America's steadfastness. Franken, clearly frustrated, challenged the criticisms, stating, "The bias against America in Europe is unreal. Why wouldn't Trump honor those commitments?" Likens had mentioned Trump's previous comments at a NATO summit, where Trump had suggested that U.S. support depended on specific definitions of NATO obligations. But here's the reality: multiple interpretations of such weighty statements can lead to significant misunderstandings. As Franken spoke about military strategies and responses, the tension between NATO's resolve and Russia's military capabilities became increasingly tangible. He highlighted how the Russian military is not to be underestimated, acknowledging their past victories in Chechnya and Syria, which should not be taken lightly. As tensions mount, is the West truly prepared for what may lie ahead? Echoes of previous conflicts linger in the air, and the question remains, how will the dynamics shift if push comes to shove? What is clear is that the international landscape is shifting, and each statement, each military move, takes us closer to an uncertain future. In the fog of war, one thing is certain: the world is watching closely, and the next chapter could change everything. Remember how Russia pours over 31% of its GDP into defense, more than any other nation on Earth? That staggering figure fueled hopes that Ukraine might snag $120 billion in funding by 2026. Half from their own coffers, half from allies through programs like Pearl and SAFE. Now, ponder this shocking reality: could a tiny Baltic state like Lithuania shame richer nations into action with just a 0.25% pledge? Picture the echo of distant thunder in Vilnius, the crisp autumn air carrying whispers of resolve as leaders debated. A decade ago, in my mind's eye, I stood in a crowded square, feeling the cobblestone chill under my boots, smelling pine smoke from bonfires. Lithuanians gathering to chant for freedom, their voices rising like a storm against old injustices. That memory gripped me now. Lithuania's annual gift of $212 million? It barely scratches Ukraine's immense daily defense bill. But look deeper. Imagine the gunfire crackling in Donetsk and Luhansk, the acrid stench of cordite drifting through jagged battle lines. Lithuania lacks the financial force or military punch to flood the front with cutting-edge weapons or jets. No, they grasp their limits, just as Ukraine does with borrowed strength. So, what's their bold play? Not flashy donations or hypersonics, but a humble call to imitate. Feel the tension build. Lithuania broadcasts to the world, we're no superpower, no titan, yet we stand united for Ukraine. Will Europe match us? Can prosperity blind you to duty? If this smaller nation dares to commit a slice of GDP, why do bigger ones hesitate? What's your excuse? Darkness looms. As budgets tighten and challenges mount, even giants must choose where their wealth flows. Will envy defeat greed, or will a spark ignite a chain reaction? Pause. What if your nation hides behind excuses while the cries from the east grow louder? The war's outcome hinges on these choices, and Lithuania's stand might shatter the indifference. But deep down, a twist brews. Are we inviting escalation, or forging unbreakable unity? Stay tuned for the tremors ahead. As the conflict in Ukraine escalates, tensions are rising to unprecedented levels. European leaders are stepping up their rhetoric, with one particular statement from Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade Theo Franken igniting a fierce backlash from Moscow. In a bold interview with a Flemish newspaper, he declared that any Russian missile strike on Brussels would provoke a swift and overwhelming response. We would flatten Moscow. Such incendiary remarks have sent shockwaves throughout Europe and provoked official indignation from the Kremlin. What does this mean for the current geopolitical landscape? Let's unpack the implications. Franken's sentiment, a phrase that translates to wipe it from the face of the earth, sparked controversy, regardless of the interpretation. During a tense exchange about potential Russian aggression, he boldly asserted that the heart of NATO would not be compromised. When the interviewer mentioned former President Donald Trump's ambiguous remarks during a NATO summit, Franken's tone shifted. Of course, America will support NATO allies, he asserted, dismissing the notion that Trump's comments indicated otherwise. His confidence was rooted in a belief that NATO's collective power remains unbreakable, even in the face of Russia's military might. However, Franken was quick to point out that the capabilities of the Russian military should not be underestimated. While NATO may have the firepower to deter aggression, Russia has ramped up its production of ammunition, a fact too often overlooked. As summer approached, the situation on the battlefield intensified. Russian forces retaliated against Ukraine's oil facilities and energy infrastructure, creating a ripple effect. Subsequently, Ukraine responded with strikes deep within Russian territory, showing its resolve against the encroaching threats. But even as both sides engaged in this escalating conflict, the question remained, who would ultimately emerge victorious? In a dramatic turn of events, the introduction of Russia's new hypersonic missile system, Oreshnik, could change the dynamics on the battlefield. With capabilities claimed to be unmatched, can it bring about a new era of warfare? The promise of such devastating firepower sends chills down the spine, making discussions around military strategy all the more urgent. But the stakes aren't just about weaponry. As Lithuania ramps up its defensive efforts with advanced air defense systems, cooperation among European nations to fortify Ukraine becomes paramount. The strategic partnerships developed between countries and defense manufacturers may determine the region's resilience against future attacks. With Lithuania utilizing its liquefied natural gas terminals to assist Ukraine's energy needs, it's clear that collaboration is key. Now, as both sides prepare for what could be a defining moment in this ongoing struggle, one must ask, will the cries for peace ever be heeded? Or will this cycle of aggression continue unabated, plunging the region further into chaos? The echoes of thunderous artillery and the smell of smoke linger in the air, signs that the fight is not yet over. In the tumultuous backdrop of a war-torn landscape, Russian state media spins tales of heroism, showering returning soldiers with accolades and cheerful reunions, a vivid display designed to mask a darker truth. Behind this orchestrated facade lies unsettling evidence of commanders resorting to inhumane acts against their own troops. An investigation by journalist Vetska reveals that desperation, cruelty, and a lust for profit drive these leaders to commit brutal executions. The harsh reality? Some commanders view these actions as a necessary means to maintain order over weary soldiers, fully aware that many face certain death on the front lines. In a military system dictating strict compliance over skill, it becomes a disturbing yet practical solution. But the most pervasive motivation is grimly financial. Russian soldiers can receive up to 3 million rubles, around $35,000, for combat injuries. This potential windfall has turned commanders into ruthless extortionists. The harrowing story of Andrei Bykov, a soldier in the 80th Guards Tank Regiment, illustrates this betrayal. According to his mother, after being injured in a car accident, Bykov found himself besieged by greed-driven commanders, Dutka and Kima, who demanded half of his compensation. When he resisted, Bykov faced deadly consequences. He was beaten to death for refusing to relinquish his hard-earned payout. Within the ranks, whispers circulate about how soldiers are coerced into parting with their money just to secure basic supplies, to avoid perilous missions, or to escape a fate labeled as death pit. One source disclosed a staggering figure, 53 million rubles, over $600,000, held by an alleged military police officer with ties to unit commanders, highlighting the corruption festering within the military hierarchy. Even more chilling, some commanders reportedly force soldiers to surrender their bank cards and PIN numbers before missions, claiming to safeguard funds for their families if tragedy strikes. The reality? Those funds often vanish into the commander's pockets, leaving families bereft and sorrowful. As this web of deceit and brutality unfolds, one must ask, what drives a man to betray his comrades? In a world filled with greed and desperation, the true cost of survival in war can be chillingly unforgiving. But with growing dissatisfaction among the ranks, a question lurks in the shadows: will the tides of rebellion rise against such tyranny, or will silence loom over the battlefield? As the war in Ukraine reaches a critical point, the tension escalates further. European leaders are ramping up their rhetoric, and one remark in particular has ignited outrage in the Kremlin. Belgian Defense and Foreign Trade Minister Theo Franken declared in an interview that if Russia were to launch missiles at Brussels, the response would be swift and overwhelming, suggesting they would reduce Moscow to rubble. This explosive statement made waves across Europe, prompting Franken to clarify his words on social media. What did he actually mean, and how did Russia respond? The phrase Franken used was controversial. It has sparked debates about NATO's commitment and response strategies. In answering concerns about potential Russian attacks, Franken expressed confidence, asserting that an attack on Brussels would trigger NATO's full military might. But what does this boldness indicate for the ongoing conflict? Franken's comments followed a question about whether he believed President Trump would honor NATO's Article 5, which obligates member countries to defend one another. The reporter's skepticism about Trump led to Franken's annoyance. Why wouldn't he said, dismissing the idea that the U.S. would shy away from supporting NATO allies in the face of a Russian strike. Yet, there's a shadow of doubt lingering, that Trump's past comments left room for ambiguity regarding U.S. commitments. This prompted a diversion into a deeper issue: the escalating supply of advanced weaponry to Ukraine, including Tomahawk missiles. Franken dismissed Russian threats associated with these shipments, stating history showed that Putin often bluffed, as was evident when Finland and Sweden joined NATO. But is this stance naive? Russia's actions suggest otherwise. Franken's analysis of Moscow's military strength casts a dark shadow over the situation. He noted that Russia's war economy produces an astonishing 4 times the ammunition as NATO combined, raising questions about the balance of power. And with each new barrage of weaponry, the feeling of imminent confrontation looms ever closer. What happens when words lead to actions? As tensions rise, so does speculation on both sides. Could the past warnings from Russia be more than just threatening rhetoric? If Ukraine continues to strike, will the Kremlin finally decide to escalate its response? Fear grips the continent as leaders prepare for what may lie ahead, knowing that Russia's military is a formidable presence. Amidst accusations and counterstatements, it's a volatile moment that may change the course of the conflict. As the clock ticks down on diplomatic solutions, one wonders, how close are we to witnessing a full-blown confrontation? Will NATO's commitment be enough to deter an emboldened Russia? Only time will tell as the stage is set for what may unfold next. Amid the escalating conflict in Ukraine, a chilling chapter unfolds as European leaders amplify their rhetoric, culminating in a fiery exchange between a Belgian minister and the Kremlin. This week, a bold statement from Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken ignited a storm of controversy. During a provocative interview, he declared with unabashed confidence that if Russia were to launch missiles at Brussels, NATO's response would not only be resolute but devastating, to the point of wiping Moscow off the map. The world paused in shock. Franken's remarks echoed across Europe, drawing both scrutiny and ire from the Kremlin. In a twist that seemed to reach beyond mere political posturing, Franken found himself defending his comments on social media, entangled in a web of interpretations and translations. Flattening Moscow had become the flashpoint of the conversation. Was it a careless remark or an intentional show of strength? The interrogative exchanges did not cease there. When pressed about faith in U.S. President Donald Trump's commitment to NATO's Article 5, which invokes collective defense, Franken's irritation bubbled to the surface. His response ridiculed the notion of American hesitation. After all, he argued, if a missile struck Brussels, the U.S. would be compelled to act decisively. Would NATO truly rally together at this critical moment, or has the rhetoric become mere bravado? Delving deeper, the dialogue shifted toward military realities. Who truly holds the upper hand in this volatile game? Franken dismissed assertions that NATO's military might outmatch Russia, illuminating facts that would send chills through the ranks. The Russian war machine is not merely a paper tiger, he contended. Its manufacturing capabilities churn out 4 times the ammunition compared to the entirety of NATO. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Yet, he countered speculation about Russia's vulnerability by emphasizing that Ukrainian forces were not fighting alone. Instead, they stood united with Western support, equipped with Western arms. The rising question lingered: how much longer could this alliance withstand the mounting pressure of war? As new weaponry emerged from Russia, each revelation weathered a storm of fear and geostrategic calculation. In an unexpected turn, the conversation veered towards grim realities. Russian generals had met their fates through unexpected, brutal means. Amidst this backdrop, the narrative of accountability began to evolve. Whispers of targeted assassinations of Russian leaders circulated, underpinned by the geopolitical ballet playing out on the battlefield. The irony was palpable. Would the architects of war themselves fall victim to the chaos they created? With the stakes higher than ever, and Russia's ominous nuclear capabilities looming, the battlefield transformed into a treacherous chessboard where each move carried consequences. As the West prepares for an uncertain future, a chilling reminder echoes: war is not just fought with weapons but with words, intentions, and the silent promises behind them. The unfolding drama intertwines peril and power, leaving us all to wonder, who truly drives the narrative in this conflict? As the conflict in Ukraine reaches a crucial turning point this week, European leaders are escalating their rhetoric. One particular statement has ignited outrage from the Kremlin and stark warnings from Russian President Vladimir Putin himself. Belgian Minister of Defense, Theo Franken, boldly declared in an interview with the Flemish newspaper De Morgen that if Russia were to target Brussels with missiles, NATO's response would be monumental. "We'd flatten Moscow," he exclaimed, a comment that has since reverberated across Europe and prompted him to clarify his words on social media. Franken's aggressive wording translates to a promise to wipe it from the face of the earth, igniting a storm of controversy no matter how you interpret it. He was addressing whether there was a fear of Putin launching a non-nuclear attack on Brussels. His reply was a confident no, asserting that such an action would strike at the core of NATO, leading to exceptional retaliation against Moscow. Later in the interview, Ralph Likens, the interviewer, brought President Trump into the mix, questioning whether he would uphold Article 5 of the NATO treaty if European members faced aggression. Franken's annoyance was palpable as he retorted, remarking on the pervasive bias against the US in Europe. Why wouldn't he asserted, countering Likens' skepticism regarding Trump's commitment to NATO during a previous summit. Trump's response back then had raised eyebrows when he suggested, "It depends on your definition," leaving it ambiguous whether he would stand by NATO allies in the event of an attack. Despite this, Franken remains unfazed. He firmly believes any missile strike from Russia would trigger a united and overwhelming military response, a notion that he thinks is self-evident. As the conversation turned back to military strategy, both Franken and Likens explored how the dynamics of the battlefield have shifted. In an engaging twist, Franken asserted that Ukraine, bolstered by NATO's arms and financial support, was not merely fighting alone, their defenses were a collective effort against the Russian threat. He believes that without this crucial backing, Ukraine would have been overwhelmed long ago. With tensions flaring and statements like these echoing worldwide, one has to wonder, what does this mean for the future of NATO, Russia, and the ongoing conflict? As leaders tread this delicate balance between bravado and caution, residents across Europe anxiously await the unfolding chapter of this war, where every word uttered could potentially alter the course of history. As the conflict in Ukraine reaches a pivotal moment, the rhetoric among European leaders intensifies. Recently, Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken sparked controversy with his bold statement regarding Russia's aggression. He claimed that if Russia were to strike Brussels, the response would be devastating, suggesting they would eradicate Moscow from existence. This declaration has fueled tensions and prompted the Kremlin to retaliate with anger and dire warnings from President Vladimir Putin. In a revealing interview, Franken responded to a question about the potential for a Russian missile attack on Brussels. He dismissed the possibility and confidently asserted that such an attack would lead to an overwhelming NATO response. This conviction, however, faced skepticism, especially regarding alliances with the United States and President Trump's fluctuating commitment to NATO's defensive obligations. When pressed further about Russia's military capabilities and the ongoing war in Ukraine, Franken expressed disbelief at the notion that NATO would not stand resolute. He described the current struggle as a fight not just for Ukraine, but for the entire West. This sentiment highlights the shared responsibility among NATO allies. The stakes have never been higher. Yet beneath the bravado and defiance, questions linger about the true strength of both NATO and Russian forces. While Franken insists that NATO possesses superior military strength, he also acknowledges Russia's efficient war economy, which produces vast quantities of ammunition. This is just one indicator of the complicated dynamics at play. In a chilling twist, some NATO members worry that Russian leaders might resort to extreme measures as the conflict escalates. This includes potential threats of nuclear action, reflecting the grave reality facing both sides. Despite NATO's military superiority in theory, the practical implications of Russia's actions have left an unsettling uncertainty in the air. Meanwhile, as the situation unfolds on the battlefield, the Russian military continues to project a carefully curated image of strength and heroism. However, stories from soldiers reveal a darker truth within the ranks, an environment rife with fear, extortion, and the horrifying depths to which commanders will sink to maintain control. Reports indicate instances of brutal treatment, where commanders execute their own soldiers, a reflection of desperation and a merciless hierarchy. One soldier's tragic fate illustrates the depth of this moral decay. Commanders exploited veterans like Andrei Bykov, demanding a share of injury compensation, which ironically symbolizes the life-and-death stakes of war. Refusing to comply led to fatal consequences, exposing the sheer brutality that underpins the military's operations. As this shocking saga unfolds, we must ask ourselves, how deep does this corruption run, and what does it mean for those still on the front lines? The chilling reality is that not only are soldiers battling enemies on the field, but they are also fighting against their own commanders. As the tension heightens, we can only wait to see what the next chapter of this harrowing conflict will reveal. In a shocking echo of a bygone era, imagine the distant rumble of an engine idling, the acrid scent of fuel mixing with Moscow's crisp night air. A car bomb erupts, shattering the silence, and another Russian general vanishes in the blink of an eye. Yaroslav Moskalev, deputy head of the main operations directorate, stepped out of a building in April, unaware that a parked vehicle laden with an explosive device was about to detonate nearby. The blast propelled him into oblivion instantly. Russia seized and charged a man they claimed was a Ukrainian spy for terrorism. Ukraine never openly took credit, yet whispers of their covert hands lingered heavily in the shadows. What unholy secrets drove this strike, and could it unravel the Kremlin's iron grip? Just months before, another Russian officer met a similarly explosive fate, a remotely triggered bomb hidden in an electric scooter outside an apartment in Moscow. The detonation roared like thunder, sending shockwaves through the city streets. Picture the damp sidewalk glistening under neon lights, the scorch marks' bitter odor clinging to the air. Kirillov, head of Russia's nuclear, biological, and chemical protection forces, perished in that fiery calamity. He wasn't celebrated for mercy. Reports from the U.S. Department of State linked him to the authorization of banned chemical weapons against Ukraine, including chloropicrin, a choking agent outlawed since 1993 after its World War I horrors. Ukrainian troops felt its sting, over 2,000 hospitalized, 3 lives extinguished under his command. Patience reigned in Kiev, precision struck like a coiled serpent. Ukraine's SBU claimed the hit swiftly, branding Kirillov a war criminal, a lawful target for judgment. Such a shameful doom awaits all Ukrainian killers, leaked sources warned ominously. Did this assassination merely scratch the surface of a deeper vendetta? Building on that chilling chain of events, the curtain fell on another high-profile figure in late 2023, Mikhail Filipenko, a Kremlin-backed lawmaker from occupied Luhansk. A car bomb detonated with earth-shaking force, the metal crunch evoking a world crumbling. Smoke billowed, thick and suffocating, as fragments scattered across the roadway. Ukraine asserted responsibility through its main intelligence directorate on Telegram, unveiling the operation's execution alongside resistance allies. Filipenko supposedly masterminded torture chambers in Luhansk's seized lands, sites of untold torment for captives. Resistance fighters waited patiently, striking with surgical precision when least expected. Rumors swirled, failed attempts in the past, like those against generals before him. Back in April, Moskalev perished in that fiery automobile trap outside Moscow. Unlike some past victims, he wasn't at the wheel. The blast caught him exiting a structure. Arrests followed, with Russia accusing a supposed Ukrainian agent of treason. Ukraine deflected openly, though covert involvement seemed probable. Earlier still, Kirillov fell to a booby-trapped scooter near his residence, his scream swallowed by the Moscow sky. Leading chemical defenses, he approved atrocities, sanctioning chloropicrin's lethal haze. Soldiers coughed through agony, over 2,000 affected, 3 succumbed directly. SBU hailed the deed, denouncing Kirillov as a criminal, vowing retribution for every Ukrainian murderer. What twisted path led to Filipenko's end, and would Kremlin elites heed the encroaching storm? Deepening the intrigue of these targeted downfalls, skeptics question Moscow's claims of overwhelming might against such audacious acts. Contradictions loom, arrests and finger-pointing mask internal fractures, perhaps. Imagine the Kremlin's halls tense with whispered fears, the echo of falling dominoes reverberating. In a twist that humbles the invader's facade, these strikes pierce the veil of Russian supremacy, exposing vulnerabilities rarely confessed. Ukrainians, in their ingenuity, turn the tide through shadow warfare, forcing generals into hiding or graves. Could this signal the Kremlin's unraveling, a cascade where even high-ranking puppets tremble? The question burns: if one blow ignites chains of command, what cataclysm awaits the next in line? Imagine the sharp sting of betrayal slicing through the air like a cold winter wind in occupied lands, where shadows whisper of revenge and the taste of diesel lingers from hidden explosives. In the fallout from Russia's invasion, Ukrainian agents are turning the tide with ruthless precision, targeting those who stain their hands with innocent blood, ensuring no stone remains unturned or safe haven untouched. Now, let's plunge deeper into this web of shadows and steal justice. Can you fathom a war where assassins strike from afar, making tyrants tremble in their bunkers, while entire nations rally against the invaders? Buckle up, because what happens next might just shatter your view of retaliation forever. The operation to neutralize Mikhail Filipinenko was carried out in unison with the movement collaborators. The GUR explained that Filipinenko orchestrated torture facilities in the occupied Luhansk territories, where prisoners of war and civilian captives endured unimaginable agony. Echoes of screams still reverberate in the memories of survivors, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the damp chill of concrete cells. This reveals a chilling pattern: Russian officers and authorities who orchestrate torment, slaughter, poisoning, or any form of malice against unarmed Ukrainians are being relentlessly pursued and eradicated. Filipinenko represents merely the most recent addition to the toll. Numerous others linger on the GUR's dossier, and those still breathing ought to fear deeply for their existence. Filipinenko's death confirms that Ukrainian spies operate without restrictions. Even if these Russian perpetrators flee across vast distances to remote sanctuaries, seemingly insulated from the battlefield's chaos, Kiev's operatives can locate and enforce retribution with blinding speed. One after another, they will be found and vanquished. Nothing appears poised to halt the GUR's mission to eradicate each one and avenge the countless defenseless men, women, and children massacred under harrowing conditions in Bucha during 2022. Slaying the culprits won't resurrect the fallen, yet it might grant their loved ones a sliver of peace in the stillness of night, free from nightmares fueled by unpunished horrors. Lithuania, though a modest player in the European Union, has just delivered a monumental boost to Ukraine, bolstering its pledges to Kiev and solidifying its role as one of the nation's most dependable and unwavering supporters. Even Russia stands incredulous at the extremes Lithuania embraces to back Ukraine and challenge Moscow's hostility. If Europe's other lands emulate this bold paradigm, the Kremlin's arsenal could confront perils far exceeding predictions. Picture the scent of scorched earth from distant strikes, the echo of sirens fading into hollow silence. How long until justice's net ensnares every last oppressor? In a tumultuous week, European leaders amplified their rhetoric as the war in Ukraine escalates. An unexpected comment from Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken ignited a fierce reaction from Moscow. During an interview, when asked about Russia potentially attacking Brussels, Franken boldly stated that the response would be swift and decisive. They would flatten Moscow. This provocative suggestion reverberated across Europe, as heads turned and conversations heated up. In this charged atmosphere, let's explore what Franken actually said, how Russia reacted, and the implications for the ongoing conflict. His words translated roughly to an ominous threat: NATO would respond forcefully to an assault on a member state. When pressed by interviewer Raf Leekens about whether he believed the U.S. would uphold its defense commitments under Article 5 of the NATO treaty, Franken's annoyance was palpable. Of course they will, he shot back, rejecting skepticism about American support. Franken's confidence in NATO's unity stood in stark contrast to U.S. former President Donald Trump's previous comments, which had raised eyebrows in Europe. Trump had indicated that U.S. responses might depend on how one defines commitments under NATO, casting doubt on America's unbreakable resolve. Yet, Franken dismissed this notion with conviction, asserting that America's commitment to NATO was unwavering and echoing the critical point of collective defense. As the conversation shifted towards the nature of military support, Franken criticized the idea that supplying advanced weapons to Ukraine, like Tomahawk missiles, would necessarily escalate tensions with Russia. In his eyes, the reluctance to aid Ukraine only prolonged the conflict and jeopardized Western security. He pointed out that reactions from the Kremlin were often bluster. Any threats wouldn't come to fruition as they recognized the dire consequences of escalation. This interview marked a critical juncture as it questioned the narratives surrounding military readiness and geopolitical strength. As Russia faced criticism for its military outcomes in Ukraine, Franken argued that their capabilities were not to be underestimated. He asserted that Russia's war economy produced more ammunition than NATO combined and stressed the importance of unwavering support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. In a flashback to a pivotal moment, one can recall the tense sound of artillery in Ukrainian towns, the acrid smell of smoke in the air, and the palpable fear among civilians. The stakes were high. The conflict's complexities were rife with unexpected twists and potential catastrophes at every turn. Would Europe unite with steadfast resilience, or would divisions and doubts threaten the very fabric of its defenses? As NATO members pondered their commitments, questions loomed large. Would nations rise to the occasion and bolster support for Ukraine, despite economic constraints? Ultimately, the fate of Ukraine hangs perilously in the balance, relying on allies to respond courageously with action, not just words. As nations respond, they must confront their own commitment to this integral moment in European history. The question remains, how will they choose to act in the face of such undeniable urgency? As the conflict in Ukraine intensifies, European leaders are raising their voices, confronting Russia with newfound boldness. In a striking interview, the Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade Theo Franken declared that any missile strike on Brussels would result in a decisive retaliation, essentially proclaiming they would wipe out Moscow. His words reverberated across the continent, inciting an outraged response from the Kremlin and a series of provocative comments from President Vladimir Putin. When asked about the fear of a Russian missile landing in Brussels, Franken dismissed it vehemently, emphasizing that NATO's resolve would be formidable. He stated with chilling confidence, if Brussels is hit, Moscow will face the consequences. This fiery assertion set the stage for a controversial dialogue about the military might of NATO versus Russia's escalating aggression. But were these comments simply bravado, or was there a deeper truth behind Franken's bold claims? The interviewer pressed further, questioning whether Trump would uphold NATO commitments in a crisis. Franken retorted, suggesting the skepticism surrounding the U.S. leadership's reliability was misplaced, especially considering America's unwavering historical support for its allies. As tensions simmer, the conversation pivoted towards the implications of missile supply to Ukraine. Franken warned against underestimating Russia, reflecting on their military advancements. He cautioned that the Russo-Ukrainian struggle was a multifaceted war involving the might of Western alliances and the resilience of Ukrainian troops. To think otherwise is a dangerous underestimation. Franken highlighted that the heart of their struggle lies in a united front against a diminishing aggressor. Nations must not falter in the face of threats, for the stakes are higher than mere territorial disputes. It's a battle for sovereignty and justice against devastating force. The eerie silence of uncertainty looms as they prepare for the next chapter in this harrowing saga. In a surprising turn, reports from Lithuania presented promising advancements in military power. Their armed forces engaged in extensive training exercises, readying themselves against airborne threats. Using advanced technologies such as the RBS-70NG air defense system and high-caliber machine guns, Lithuania aimed to show its capability against potential drone swarms released by adversaries. The drills underscored a growing commitment among European nations to bolster military cohesion and support the embattled Ukraine. As one nation stands against tyranny, the signs of unity and shared resolve among allies shine through the darkness of conflict. Nations are standing vigilant, eager to protect their sovereignty and ensure that such aggression does not go unanswered. The narrative of this war continues to unfold, marked by strategic posturing, technological advancements, and a relentless pursuit of peace amid chaos. What lies ahead remains uncertain, but one thing is clear, this battle for resilience against aggression will shape the very future of Europe. The next move could change everything. Will unity prove strong enough to quell the tide of war? As whispers of new military technologies emerge, the world watches, breathless in anticipation. In a tense atmosphere, the battle for Ukraine reaches a critical juncture, escalating tensions between European leaders and the Kremlin to unsettling heights. This week, the Belgian Minister of Defense, Theo Franken, sparked outrage with a bold assertion: if Russia launched a missile at Brussels, the response would be catastrophic, Moscow would be eradicated. Imagine the shockwaves reverberating through the international community as this statement, much like a thunderclap, sent ripples through diplomatic circles. Franken's remarks were made during an interview with the Flemish publication De Morgen, where he addressed the prevailing fears surrounding potential Russian aggression. When questioned about the likelihood of a missile striking Brussels, he brazenly declared that any attack on NATO soil would provoke an overwhelming response, rather than shy away from confrontation. "We'd flatten Moscow," he said, igniting a firestorm of political backlash from Russian officials. His words echoed like a war drum, and the Kremlin was quick to retaliate, branding the comments as reckless. Yet, as the interview continued, the interviewer pressed deeper into the implications of such statements. Franken faced scrutiny over NATO's commitment, especially regarding reactions to a hypothetical strike on Brussels. His irritation grew when Donald Trump's statements from a NATO summit were brought up, which hinted at uncertainty in U.S. support. The tension in the room was palpable as Franken defended the alliance, emphasizing that America would, without question, stand resolutely with its partners in the face of aggression. But as realities of warfare and military strategies clashed, unforeseen elements began unfolding. What happens when the unthinkable occurs? If Russia retaliates with missile strikes, what would be left of cities like Brussels or even Moscow? In a world shadowed by uncertainty, the stakes continue to rise as both sides prepare for combat. A new chapter in this ongoing saga seems all but inevitable. Amid this high-stakes discourse, the Russian military's capabilities come under scrutiny. Franken voiced skepticism about claims that Russia's military strength was a mere facade, suggesting instead that they were indeed a formidable force, gaining resources faster than NATO could muster. He pointed out their extensive military engagements, from Chechnya to Syria, and argued that Europe cannot afford to overlook the challenges posed by a nation with such a rich military history and spirit. In a dramatic turn, the interview revealed a critical truth: Ukrainians are not fighting alone. They wield Western weapons and ammunition, facing the entirety of the Russian military. Without our support, they would be overwhelmed, he claimed, spotlighting the crucial role of international alliances in the conflict. As doors close on diplomatic channels, what will the future hold for Europe and Russia? Can we expect a new war on the horizon as nations prepare, shields raised, for what's to come? And just like that, out of the chaos, unexpected alliances and strategies begin to emerge, shaping the fate of a continent in peril. The battle lines are drawn. And there's no turning back. This chess game of alliances and military might has only just begun. With every word spoken, shadows of uncertainty loom larger. What lies ahead in this tale of conflict, resilience, and determination? The world watches, breath held, waiting for the next move. In a time when tensions run high, a striking exchange between Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken and the Kremlin has highlighted the explosive climate of international relations. Franken made a bold declaration: if Russia launched a missile at Brussels, NATO would respond decisively, we would wipe Moscow off the map. This audacious statement reverberated across Europe, prompting a furious backlash from Russian officials, who labeled his remarks as reckless and alarmingly disconnected from reality. The conversation unfolded against the backdrop of an escalating conflict in Ukraine, where every word carries weight. When pressed about NATO's commitment under Article 5, Franken countered skepticism about American resolve with an assertive, "Why wouldn't he respect our alliances?" This remark stirred debates about past ambiguities in U.S. support for NATO, leaning on President Trump's initial hesitations regarding international commitments. With each insistence on NATO's unity, an undercurrent of fear emerged regarding Russia's missile capabilities. Franken voiced his concerns about the Oreshnik, a hypersonic missile system, capable of striking targets across Europe. The Russians can now strike most of Europe, he warned ominously, revealing how this advancement had shifted the security landscape dramatically. The notion of a nuclear threat hung in the air, a chilling specter that cast a shadow over the conversation. Yet Franken argued that asymmetric threats, like cyber or conventional attacks, pose a more immediate danger than nuclear conflict, which he terms a bleak fantasy. Ready for any crisis. He has kept an emergency kit stocked with essentials, foreseeing a potential collapse of societal order. During the pandemic, people panicked. "I won't wait for stores to restock," he stressed, underscoring his concerns for the future. However, the Kremlin wasted no time in retaliating. Their official statements dismissed Franken's rhetoric as abnormal and utterly disconnected from reality. They derided the idea that Belgians would follow through with his threats, even as an acknowledgement of underlying tension lingered behind the bravado. As realizations of geopolitical instability settle in, one must ponder the future. Will NATO maintain its stronghold, or has the Russian bear fully awakened? As the situation in Ukraine evolves, the boundary between security and provocation continues to blur. Will Franken's provocative words ignite genuine re-evaluations of military strategy across Europe? Or does the Kremlin's brash rhetoric mask fragility in its military ambitions? As we navigate these intertwined narratives, the urgency to grasp the complexities of our current age cannot be overstated. Russia's recent advancements in weaponry, particularly hypersonic systems, underpin the shifting balance of power. The Oreshnik missile, boasting a range of up to 3,400 miles, can threaten major cities, underscoring NATO's fears. With plans to deploy 600 F-35 fighter jets in Europe, the air superiority of NATO remains a pivotal factor in this geopolitical chess game. In this pivotal moment, the stakes couldn't be higher. Can alliances withstand the pressure of provocation? As NATO braces for potential aggression, the echoes of Franken's statements linger, urging leaders to reassess military preparedness and diplomatic strategies. The future of European security hinges on the dual narrative of strength and strategy, evoking questions that demand urgent answers. Will Europe rise to the occasion or retreat into complacency as shadows of conflict loom large? The world watches closely, waiting for what the next chapter will bring. As the conflict in Ukraine escalates, the stakes have never been higher, prompting intense discussions among European leaders. This week, a Belgian official ignited controversy with a bold statement that could change the course of the war. The question on everyone's mind: could a declaration of force be the key to unveiling the vulnerability of Russian military ambitions? In an exclusive interview, Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, boldly declared that if Russia launched missiles at Brussels, NATO's retaliation would be swift and overwhelming. The remark, which suggested obliterating Moscow, sent shockwaves throughout Europe and ignited a fierce response from the Kremlin. How did a mere comment escalate tensions to this extent? Franken's statement, suggesting a flattening of Moscow, stemmed from a question about the ever-looming threat of a Russian missile strike. When pressed about the possibility of President Donald Trump's commitment to NATO's Article 5, which ensures collective defense, Franken bristled at the doubt. Of course, he will respect it, he asserted, dismissing the skepticism surrounding America's reliability. But are words enough to quell fears of a nuclear escalation? Despite the bravado, the conversation revealed complexities about the war itself. Franken articulated a crucial point: NATO shared responsibility for Ukraine's defense. The Ukrainians are fighting the whole of the West, he emphasized, highlighting how critical Western support has become. But is this alliance strong enough to withstand Russia's fierce military resurgence? In a worrisome twist, Russian military advancements loom large. The announcement of the Oreshnik missile, capable of striking anywhere on Earth and potentially nuclear-powered, elevates the urgency of preparation. Imagine a missile that could circle the globe undetected, delivering a nuclear payload within moments. "It's a tiny flying Chernobyl," said nuclear expert Jeffrey Lewis, illustrating its potential for destabilization. Will this weapon create insurmountable challenges for global security? Further complicating matters, Russia also unveiled the Poseidon underwater drone, which President Putin touted as unmatched in speed and depth. Citing its invincible nature and the implications for defense infrastructures worldwide, the urgency weighs heavily on European leaders. Is this new arsenal the harbinger of a more aggressive Russia, or does it signal desperation masked by bravado? As these narratives unfold, a pressing question remains: is Europe truly prepared for the implications of these advancements? The convergence of fear, military strategy, and geopolitical tension begs for urgent attention. Understanding these dynamics is critical as new chapters in this conflict emerge. The question of what comes next hangs heavily in the air. What lies beyond this pivotal moment in history? And how might it reshape not only Europe but the world as we know it? In a dramatic escalation of the war in Ukraine, European leaders are intensifying their rhetoric, which has sparked outrage from the Kremlin. Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, made headlines this week with a shocking declaration. He asserted that any Russian missile attack on Brussels would meet with a decisive response, vowing to erase Moscow from existence. This audacious statement reverberated across Europe, igniting an immediate backlash from President Putin, who issued ominous warnings in retaliation. What compelled Franken to make such a provocative promise? During an interview, he discussed the growing fear of Russian aggression against NATO, especially regarding Brussels as a potential target. When asked about the likelihood of such an attack, he confidently declared, "If it happens, it would strike at the heart of NATO, and we would respond with overwhelming force." His comments provoked a media storm, forcing him to clarify his position on social media platforms, emphasizing NATO's commitment to collective defense amid rising tensions. The interview further unfolded as he addressed past statements by President Trump regarding NATO's Article 5, which outlines mutual defense obligations. Why wouldn't Trump uphold Article 5? Franken challenged. America firmly stands with NATO, he declared, expressing clear frustration at any suggestion to the contrary. This sparked intense debate over transatlantic relations, the determination to support Ukraine, and the ongoing looming threats from Russia. As the discussion delved deeper, a startling twist emerged. Franken illuminated the stark reality of the military balance, revealing an unsettling truth: the Russians have significantly increased their ammunition production, outpacing NATO forces. While Ukraine's military advantages stem from Western support, they remain locked in a perilous struggle against a stubborn and capable adversary. This isn't merely a clash of nations, it's a confrontation of ideologies, values, and survival. Shifting focus, the impact of the conflict on civilians added a deeply heart-wrenching layer to the narrative. As Ukrainian forces regained control of Bucha, the grim fallout from their victory revealed the full extent of the horrors endured. Eyewitness accounts recounted ghastly acts of brutality, detailing systematic killings and merciless torture by Russian forces. Survivors share harrowing stories of fear-inducing sniper fire, targeting anyone brave enough to leave their homes. Imagining that atmosphere, one can almost hear the whispers of terror at night, the palpable hunger, and the silent prayers for hope and survival. Streets that once echoed with laughter now bear the scars of violence, with mutilated bodies left behind, some rigged with explosives, a sinister gesture from retreating soldiers. Personal narratives of agony and despair surfaced, detailing homes rifled through, cherished items destroyed, and families forever fragmented. What's even more chilling? Stories emerged of women and girls abducted and imprisoned, enduring unspeakable fates at the hands of their captors. Amid this relentless onslaught of horror, residents called for justice, pointing to a glaring need for accountability in the wake of such unspeakable suffering. These haunting revelations radiate beyond the borders of Bucha. Will the world rise to answer the call for justice and acknowledge the darkness that has unfolded? Will humanity confront this cycle of violence, or will it continue to repeat, leaving lasting scars on the fabric of society? In this ongoing struggle, the real battles are fought not just in war-torn streets but also within the hearts and minds of those caught in the crossfire of despair and enduring hope. In the tempestuous arena of international politics, a striking narrative unfolds, a clash of titans as tensions soar between Europe and Russia. As the war in Ukraine reaches a critical juncture, an unexpected remark sends shockwaves through diplomatic channels. Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken, in a stirring interview with a Flemish publication, boldly declared that if Russia were to strike Brussels, they would retaliate with overwhelming force, we'd flatten Moscow. This audacious freedom of speech ignited a furious fire within the Kremlin, with Russian President Vladimir Putin responding ominously. But what lies beneath these words, and what implications do they hold for the future? As applause and criticism swirl, let's delve into the heart of this controversy, exploring the contours of power, fear, and defiance. Franken's chilling suggestion that a potential Russian missile strike would be met with total annihilation sparked a whirlwind of responses. When asked about the possibility of such an attack, his confident retort was tinged with fierceness: "No, they wouldn't dare. That would ignite the heart of NATO." Each word soaked in conviction split the air with tension, igniting debates about the ramifications of nuclear threats and military responses. But the stakes are even higher. Amidst a backdrop of escalating tensions and fear, Putin's Russia hints at its military prowess through the unveiling of new missile technologies. The notorious Oreshnik, a nuclear-powered missile that defies conventional limitations, has the capability to traverse the globe at unimaginable speeds. Imagining this tiny flying Chernobyl swiftly gliding through the sky evokes the shattering fear of an unseen storm. What does this mean for countries across Europe, standing in the shadow of such powerful weapons? As the dust settles on Franken's remarks and the Kremlin's hellish warnings, we must grapple with a terrifying truth: Russia's military capabilities are evolving. The Oreshnik isn't just a threat, it's a reminder of the imbalance in global military power, a lesson that the world cannot afford to ignore. Will NATO remain steadfast in its resolve, or will Russia's defiance overwhelm European defenses? As we peel back the headlines, the urgency to understand these perilous dynamics becomes strikingly clear. In a world where danger looms, is it possible for truth to emerge amidst the chaos? Thus, we enter a world rife with conflicting narratives and anxious ideologies, where every spoken word in the corridors of power may alter fate. What lies ahead as Europe braces against a looming storm? The answers remain ensconced in the shadows of ongoing negotiations, military advancements, and the ever-present tension that threatens to unhinge the fragile balance of peace.